If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Explorers of haunted, abandoned places and ghost hunters, what's the most terrifying paranormal, ghostly, or demonic thing you've ever encountered in a rundown location?
Unexplained encounter with a cloaked entity at 4:40 a.m. in my village. This happened recently in the village of Stancesci, Botoșani County, Romania, on a rural road known as DC 61, at house number 36, a place I've known since I was a kid. I was walking early in the morning, around 4:40 a.m. The light was dim, not fully dark, more like a grayish-white. As I passed by this old, abandoned house with a broken fence and overgrown yard, something strange happened. I saw a very tall humanoid figure, roughly the height of the doorway, entirely dressed in white. It looked like it was wearing a long cloak or sheet. It didn't walk, it suddenly darted backward into the yard in a weird zigzag motion. I froze, yelled instinctively, and threw a stone in its direction. But then, nothing. It was gone. It was completely silent and still, with not even a rustle of leaves. It didn't run. It just wasn't there anymore. I panicked, video called someone right away, and got out of that area fast. Later that day I came back to check but saw nothing, just the same old house and wild yard. Still can't explain it. The abandoned farm in Montes de Maria. This happened a few years ago. My family owns a small farm in the Montes de Maria, a remote area in Colombia. People from the nearby town always told stories about the place, strange voices at night, lights moving in the forest, things disappearing, but I never believed any of it. One afternoon, I went alone to the farm to clean the old barn and fix some fences. At first, everything seemed normal, the wind blowing through the trees, birds singing. Until I started hearing something strange, whispers coming from the forest, almost like someone was talking very softly. I thought it was just animals. But as I walked closer to the barn, the whispers became clearer, almost human. I tried to ignore them, but I felt someone following me between the trees. Every time I turned around. Nothing. Just shadows. When I entered the barn, I froze. The floor was covered in scratches and marks, like something had been dragged across it. On the wall, written with something dark, were the words, "I see you." I ran toward the main house, but as I turned the corner, I saw a tall, thin figure, completely black, standing among the trees, staring at me. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. I locked myself inside the house and sat shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I heard knocks on the roof and whispers in the hallway, even though I was completely alone. The next day, I told my cousin, who lives nearby, what happened. He looked at me seriously and said, "Bro, that farm has always been special. People say something has lived there long before your family arrived, and it only shows itself when you're alone." I've never been alone on that farm again. Even now, whenever I pass near the Montes de Maria at night, I avoid looking toward that place. But sometimes, while I'm sleeping in the city, I hear a whisper calling my name, coming from there. My friends and I went to an abandoned house. My friend and I saw an abandoned house pop up a few weeks ago, and after countless times asking to go, they finally agreed. After coming back from 7 to 11, we were talking about what to say to the cops if they found us. We agreed on saying that my friend got mad and threw the tennis ball and went to go retrieve it. As we arrived to the house, we got over a fence and started in the backyard looking for an entrance. All the windows were boarded up, so we went to the shed in the backyard. There were a bunch of creepy things in there, not normal things you would find in a shed, not tools. We found a bunch of Halloween decorations and a Ouija board. We said, "Duck that," and closed the door behind us. A couple of seconds later the door flew open, there wasn't even a slight breeze out. And there was a state of a family that made me dizzy just standing near it. I passed out, and when I woke back up, while we were looking for an entrance, we found a tennis ball with the number 7 on it. We heard police sirens and decided to leave. Going back to our bikes, we locked them at the 7 to 11, we reached what the number 7 spiritually means or something, I don't really remember, and it said a spirit is inviting you to play for risk of reward or something like that. If someone can tell me what I looked up to get that result, that would be nice because I can't find it anymore. Skull deer thing following? This is something that I am so confused about. I have all my life been rather in tune with the paranormal. I hate one thing. I do have auditory hallucinations, so before I get into this, some background. Some time ago, my roommate and I lived in an old, abandoned school. Old college? It was like a prison to me due to all the bars. Well, while I was chilling, my roommate had gone to the hospital, so it was just me chilling, playing games late at night. I heard hooves walking around in the hallway near my old room. If someone were in the hallway to the left, I would hear it. I had to see if it was just me hearing shit, but as soon as I did, I just saw this, decaying. Think of a furry. I know this sounds like a furry in a fursuit, but it's not. I could smell iron, similar to the scent of a large amount of blood, but it had a rotten odor. It looked down at me. It had the skull of a deer. I blinked. It was now at the other end of the hall near the exit, by a parking lot. I don't think the figure I saw was a furry creature. I went back inside because I worked for the cafeteria and needed to prepare for bed, as the complex where I lived uses that area as a rec room. I call it a cafeteria because it was never renovated, and when I was there, I overheard these two ladies who run the main office say that the security found a whole family ended, and it looked something out of a horror movie, and the other lady talked about how they ruled it out as medical complications as the mother had just had a C-section. The lady who works in the office said this, well, I have no idea what that thing is, but ever since I noticed that after we moved out, some nights I'll hear my roommate call my name, yet I'm alone. Some nights I'll get a text from them asking if I yelled their name when I'm not there. I assume the entity is a mimic. I don't think it's my pre-existing problems, as usually it's just knocking and a very specific knock. Sometimes someone says, hey, I just want to know, 1, what the duck did I see? 2, could these be tied? Also, this sighting was when I was 18-19. I know this sounds batshit insane, but yeah. When a spirit followed me home. In 2007-ish, I was about 13 years old. My brother, my cousin, and her boyfriend thought it would be fun to walk around an abandoned mental hospital for children in the afternoon. It was abandoned within just a few years prior due to spores that were causing cancer. The area was huge, acres and acres of land. That is because the hospital itself was not just one building.
There were multiple buildings marked A, B, C, etc., arranged in a circle.
Each building housed children with a specific illness/disorder category. In the middle of said circle was a rusted-out playground, the perfect setting for a horror film. We shortly arrived and parked in front of Building C. As we were walking, every single time I was near one of the buildings, I would hear children's laughter. It was echoed but sounded like it was right next to me. Very odd. My cousin tried opening a door to Building B, but it was locked shut. A couple of seconds later, there was a loud bang coming from the other side of the door. My brother, being my brother, always said, it's just kids partying in there as his reasoning for anything abnormal happening. My cousin then screamed and pointed up at a window, claiming she saw a girl with a white gown on. I got too freaked out and asked if I could go back to the car. My cousin's boyfriend escorted me, and the rest of them decided to continue exploring. Once I got in the car, I started to hear laughter again. I blasted the radio to try to tune it out, but the laughter got louder and louder, almost as if they were mocking me. I decided to put my hands over my ears and put my head in between my legs, and yet the laughter never diminished even slightly. When they all came back, my cousin said she heard loud laughter and a gurgling sound so frequently that she made everyone else come back with her to the car. My brother, still being my brother, continued his claim of kids being in the buildings and screwing around. Fast forward to the evening, I was sleeping facing the wall. I woke up with my right side being sore. I decided to turn over on my left side and face the room. Right when I opened my eyes, I saw a girl with a white gown on, standing over me. Immediate shock shrouded me, not being able to quickly break contact with her. I eventually blinked, and she disappeared. I ended up running to my parents' room and sleeping there for the rest of the night. Ghost in the middle of nowhere. A few years back, I was out with some friends, doing what teenagers do and being stupid. This particular night, we went out ghost hunting to a place around here called Labate Mansion. We stayed out there for a while and came back to the cars. The trip was uneventful. So 3 of us head out to an old dirt road in the middle of nowhere to drink. A few hours pass, I have consumed only half a can of beer, while the other guys have each had 2 or 3 cans. They decide to sleep in the car, and I am in the back seat trying to stay awake to act as the alarm when, just after 3 a.m., we hear a small child crying. The other 2 guys were hard asleep and immediately jolted awake. We all jumped out of the car but couldn't find the source of the crying. There was nothing but short grass for hundreds of yards, the only house half a mile away. It was pretty creepy. It was just something that I thought was extremely creepy and terrified us. My local spooky abandoned house. So, in the area where I live, there's an abandoned cottage near the roadside. It's been abandoned for years and is creepy as hell. The furniture was never removed from inside, so there are documents, newspapers, torn up sofas, 2 beds upstairs, and even a random baby bath floating around. I've explored the place before and caught a few snaps of what I thought was a face in the darkness, but unfortunately my phone broke not long after, and since I hadn't backed up my pictures in a while, it was all gone. I'm thinking of maybe going back to see if I can get any interesting pictures. Even if not, the house is at least interesting to see, as everything is pretty well intact. A little backstory on the house, which is very sad. Back in the early 1900s, a family had built the house on some farming land. Back in its prime, it was supposed to be an amazing little house with a beautiful garden that kept chickens and grew all the family's fruit and veg. After a few years, this guy came forward to the family, claiming he owned the land they had built their home on, and it was now his. They had to leave everything behind. I can only imagine how upset the family would have been. Anyways, the annoying part of the story is the guy just left the house to rot, never did anything with it, or let anyone else move in. It fell to ruin, and now it's beyond repairing, or at least it would take a ton of money to renovate it. I'm not 100% sure on the whole story. My old neighbor told me about it, so I'd imagine it's pretty accurate. My stories as an urban explorer. I ended up in the hospital over my ducked-up hobby. In Staunton, Virginia, just off Route 288, I don't care about hiding my identity or where I live. Come kill me, duckers. There's an old mental hospital simply called Western State Lunatic Asylum. It has 3 generations. The first sanitarium, from 1860 to 2003, served as a minimum security prison from 1970 onward. The second complex, which was built in the 60s and went until 2010. The third complex opened in 2013. Which, hard eye horror, is like 30 yards away from the second one. Unfortunately, I couldn't get into the first one, as it was going through serious renovations. Whose bright ducking idea was it to turn an insane asylum into a ducking apartment complex? Regardless, it's a gorgeous facility. Go up towards the highway, and you'll see a massive, looming building called the Desjarnet Building. It was where all the lobotomies were performed. So, I, being the smartest person y'all will ever meet, parked my pickup over at the Sheets just across from it and, around 8:30 at night, made my way to the massive looming structure. Sure, there was razor wire and a metric duct and of no trespassing signs, but there was a stupid way to get in. The property owners had bulldozed a bunch of dirt up to a loading dock, but not all the way up. So, I crawled in through the gap between the dirt and the ceiling. To give you a basic picture, this place was absolutely ducked. Like, worse than Central. Homeless people did live here. There were an overwhelming number of needles left by drug users. The place ducking stunk. Like, reeked of decay. Mold, rotten food, shit, and piss? Tasty. As I made my way up the spiraling stairs, I felt eyes on me the entire time. After exploring for about 2 hours, I finally reached the top floor. The children's ward. Aha, it doesn't matter what age you were. I walk into the first room I see. As I snap a single picture, I become so overwhelmed by emotions, I fall right to my knees and start crying. Like, full-on sobbing. I have no idea where it came from. I was coughing and gagging and just crying. I was mortified. I got up, and at the far end of the hall, I saw a little boy in a hospital gown. I couldn't help it. I ran. Ran as fast as I could down the stairs. Stupid ducking me, I put all my weight on the weak stairwell handrail. The handrail came loose, causing me to fall a story down. I hit the floor with a gnarly, wet crack and blacked out. Guess where I wake up? In an ambulance. I found out later that a cop had seen me walk in and sit at the entrance. But when he never saw me come out, 3 hours later, he went to explore. He found me at the bottom of the stairwell. Oh, and that crack? I broke my butt bone. This is a story that happened 5 years ago at an abandoned house. I was with my friends Mikey, Angelo, and Kevin. We discovered an abandoned house about a mile away from one of our houses. It had graffiti all over it and looked really beat down. 5 minutes after we got there, I threw a rock in an open doorway to see if there were any animals. Nothing happened. Then my friend said this wasn't a good idea, so we turned around and started walking the other way. As I left, a rock came over my head and hit the dirt in front of us. We thought it was some pranksters messing with us, so being us, we went back to find them. I was pretty big for my age and really muscular, so I went in first, and then they followed soon after. We heard crackling as if somebody were outside. So we split up to find whoever was messing with us. We were looking around for 5 minutes, and I went upstairs and saw 3 lumps in the corner. I thought they were bodies. I froze, but to my relief, they were sleeping bags. So I told my friends there were homeless people living there and we should go. As I was leaving to go downstairs, I heard footsteps behind me, and I turned around to see a big skinny black figure standing in the dark doorway of the next room. I turned and ran. When I turned around, I heard the footsteps get faster. The person in the doorway was running after me. I yelled and told my friends to get the hell out. Luckily we all made it out. If I had checked out that room, only God knows what would have happened. I have never told anybody this story. Only my friends and I know what went down. My one time going ghost hunting. My last story that I have is supernatural in nature. I was around 18 or 19 years old, which was nearly 13 years ago. My friend at the time asked me if I wanted to go ghost hunting with him and this other group, one of the members he was trying to get to know on a closer level. At the time I had nothing to do, so I agreed. The first place we went to was a cemetery. When my friend and I get there, the other people are already there. There was a lesbian couple who were the leads of the group, as well as being super nice, a guy who was excited to do this, a girl who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else but here, and the girl my friend was interested in. We spent a good hour in the cemetery and nothing really happened. My friend says that he felt like something was watching us. I don't believe him because the couple brought ghost hunting gear, but nothing happened, and I also think he was just trying to impress the girl. We eventually leave and go to the next place. The next place was, I don't even know what to call it. It looked like it could have been a church or a meeting hall. The biggest thing about it was that whatever it was burnt down and abandoned. You would think not much remained, but it was such an old building that it was made out of cement bricks, so only the flooring, ceiling, and windows were gone. Though the real frightening thing about the building was the fact that it was so far out from the city that it was a place where people went to use drugs. Along with the gear, we all also had some form of self-defense, just in case, before making our way in. Immediately, we had to be careful going in, as there were random syringes laying around. Inside, the ground consisted of dirt, stone, and old wood flooring, all trampled down with trash, debris, and scattered needles. There were no interior walls in this building, but you could look to the ground and see where the walls would have been. The ghost hunting gear the couple had was acting weird, not that it was picking something up, but that it wasn't turning on at all. None of the 3 pieces of equipment they brought worked, so we relied on an old tape recorder that my friend had brought, which was functional. We set it up in the middle of the building and went about our ways. We spent about 30 minutes there, but it felt longer, mainly because I was worried that a drug addict would show up. Though as time went on, the sky would get darker and darker, specifically over the main room of the building. I, my friend, the girl he liked, and the girl that didn't want to be there were on the edge of the main room when the girl who didn't want to be there let out a yell. Everyone's attention turned to her, as she moved her arm to look at the back of it. On the back of her arm was this large, bright red, 4-finger scratch mark. We decided to call it there and leave after that, along with a sense of uneasiness that we all were feeling. The night sky replaced the looming darkness overhead as we exited the building. We regrouped in the parking lot of a Carl's Jr. and went over everything. While getting everything together, we all talked about how we had this heavy uneasiness near the end. We checked everyone's hand compared to the scratch. The mark dwarfed everyone's hand. The closest was my friend, who had to stain himself to get just barely smaller than the scratch size. The ghost hunting gear, then, was working again, like nothing was wrong. Finally, we go over the audio from the recorder. It was clear at first, you're able to hear us clearly in the background of the recording. Then the sound of wind blowing loudly was heard, like you were in the middle of a storm, but there was no wind that night, though you could still hear us. Suddenly, you hear the girl who was scratching yell, and the wind immediately stops. I don't know what we encountered, but it obviously didn't want us there. Show me my dad was doing a bit of urban exploring around South Tunnel, Tennessee. So my dad and I were walking through South Tunnel. Now for those of you who don't know, South Tunnel was one of the major parts of the Battle of Gallatin. It is haunted. We managed to walk all the way through South Tunnel okay. Now there may be 2 tunnels, but here's a bit of history. Back in the Civil War, part of the tunnel was collapsed on purpose. It was a trap. This was part of the Battle of Gallatin. As we heard a disembodied voice, it got really cold, colder than before. I had my flashlight, and I was making sure we had a place to go if a train were to come through. As I shined my light onto the wall, I saw someone in a Confederate officer's uniform walk through the wall of the tunnel. I told my dad what I saw, and we got the hell out of Dodge. Need help identifying a possible demonic interaction? I had an experience tonight that just rubbed me the wrong way and is giving me the creeps, and I was hoping someone who's experienced it could let me know what happened tonight. So for some context, I've been ghost hunting seriously for about a year, but I've grown up around a family who have seen and talked to spirits all of my life. I've been told that if I were to ever go ghost hunting, I should set boundaries beforehand. However, tonight I stupidly forgot to do this. So the search for a spirit begins. I am with 2 other girls besides myself, and I have my headphones on playing music. The original plan was for them to ask questions that I couldn't hear and see if I got any answers. There is a specific name for this method, but I can't remember it exactly. However, something different happened tonight, and it's the first time I've experienced this. We were parked at a cemetery that we know well and have ghost hunted at / left flowers at before. Normally it is very busy and lively, and someone is always willing to talk, but not tonight. Tonight it was dead silent for at least 10 minutes. Then I heard children laughing, and then I saw a completely black figure hiding in the bushes and peeking out at us. I tried to ignore it because it creeped me out, but then it shifted into something else. Then I started getting flashes of a gentleman in a suit, almost bowing and holding his hand out, wearing a white glove, as if asking me to dance. The energy was weird. It was like he was telling me to trust him and go with him. I did not. I again tried to ignore him. This is when it shifted again, and it was another black figure. However, this one had a distended neck and was circling the car. Before I had told my friends this, one of them tapped my shoulder. I took off my headphones, and she said she felt unsafe. I put my headphones back on and closed my eyes, and I got many flashes of the same figure circling our car and bending down to look into the windows. Each time he bent down, his neck was bent / distended in a creepy way. I told her we had to go. I didn't want to look anymore. This was clearly something that was getting close to us, and I couldn't ignore it or get it to go away. So she drove forward and made a U-turn, and I swear I saw him standing in the middle of the road, just waiting. This has never happened before. I've never seen something so disturbing. Can someone please tell me what we might have seen? I need answers. This is a story that happened to my boyfriend and me 2 years ago. For some, it might not necessarily be scary, but for us, it was quite disturbing. I should point out that I've never reacted to fear the way I did that night. My boyfriend is someone quite fearless and rarely gets scared of anything. We weren't under the influence of drugs or alcohol. We also often go for walks at night and explore neighborhoods, so it wasn't that kind of adrenaline you get when doing something new or dangerous. We live in a quiet suburb in Quebec where absolutely nothing happens at night, especially in the neighborhood we were in. It was late, probably around 2 a.m., and we were walking through a park. We saw a small hill in the distance and thought it would be nice to check out the view from the top. We were now on the hill, looking out into the distance, when suddenly something caught my eye. A white mass was at the bottom of the hill. I looked at it with interest, but I couldn't really tell what it was because of the darkness. It definitely wasn't human, that much was clear. It was too big to be a dog and certainly not any other animal you'd find in Canada. There were only houses around. At that moment, I felt terrified, pure fear. My boyfriend still hadn't noticed what was happening, as all of this happened within a few seconds. Then I started hearing footsteps, and my boyfriend heard them too. Something was approaching us. It sounded like human footsteps, as if someone were coming toward us. But the white mass was still at the bottom of the hill. It wasn't standing still. It was moving a little, as if searching for something on the ground, but it wasn't what was coming toward us. My boyfriend noticed I was completely frozen in fear. I couldn't move. He started to see the white mass, too, and tried nudging me to snap me out of it. He ended up grabbing my arm, and we ran down the hill. As we were running toward the park exit, we passed by some trees. The trees blocked our view of the white mass. But once we got past the trees, nothing. No more white figure, no more noise, nothing. Anxiety consumed us for the rest of the night, and we even sensed someone following us on our way home. For some, this little story might seem trivial. But it left a mark on us like nothing else before. We even tear up sometimes when we talk about it. For no apparent reason, we felt truly in danger that night. We're looking for answers or similar experiences, whether rational or out of the ordinary. What do you think? Feel free to ask questions if you want to better understand the context. A weird thing happened while exploring an abandoned house. Okay, I want to start with saying it may not be really paranormal, or at least I think so. Near my home there is this old house, which I really wanted to explore. A few weeks ago I went there with my boyfriend, but there was too much snow, and we were scared that if there was a homeless person or something like that, we wouldn't be able to run. Sadly I don't have any pictures of it, but we were able to peek inside. Today, my friend, boyfriend, and I returned to the old house. We got something to defend ourselves, and we went in. The first thing we saw was that the well that was previously closed was now open. Then we went a peek into the house. As we went in, we felt a horrible smell, something like rotten meat. The next thing was that the furniture was in a completely different position as when we were there last time. I took some pictures, and as I looked into a room on the opposite side of the big hole that we went in, I saw something/someone sitting on the couch. At first I thought it was a homeless person, but I realized it was impossible, as we were making quite a lot of noises, so the person would probably hear us. I joked that it may be a dead body. We heard many noises, but as I checked the rest of the house, there was nothing in there. I wanted to go into the room, but then we noticed someone looking at us from a house across the field. We got scared, so we went the other way, in the direction of a lake. We sat there for some minutes before turning back and going to my house. While we were next to the house of the man who had been watching us earlier, he said something like, "You know it's private property, and you enter at your own risk." So yeah, that was a pretty weird experience. We will probably research the house later. Just saw a shadow entity at an abandoned home during a 2 a.m. drive. This happened at least 20 minutes ago. I was dumping an old worn mattress on the calm side of town at this hour because it best suited my schedule. No traffic at all, the night was completely still, save for the occasional stray looming around. As I was looking for a spot, I passed a house in a cul-de-sac that didn't age well at all. I have been on this street during the daytime, and the house is definitely abandoned. To give you a picture of the house, it's a 2-story compound-like bungalow with a white gated fence and a short open-air driveway with a shitty early 90s Nissan sedan sitting unoccupied inside. So I was doing the U-turn, and as I looked around me, my eyes glanced at some sort of pure black arm or leg going through one of the metal bars on the house's gate. I rescue strays with my mom, and this did not look like any stray cat or dog I knew. This was a super thin figure, almost fibrous-like. Most strays around the area are tabby and dirty gray. Anyways, I see this and I decide to aim my car at the driveway of said home, turning on the high beams to confirm what I saw. Zero movements, zero signs of anything resembling the figure I saw, just a very old junk Nissan Stanza sitting abandoned in the lot for what was definitely more than a decade, with nothing hiding underneath or in the wheel wells. This left me thinking the entire drive home. The unfinished house next to my cousin's place might actually be haunted. There is this unfinished house right next to my cousin's place. It has been there since we were born. We call it the uncle's house because one uncle owns it, but he never visits or finishes it. It is a full house with rooms, a bathroom, a tub, and a toilet, but there are no windows or doors. The spaces for them are just open, so you can climb through the window openings or walk straight through the doorway. Inside, the floor is cold and rough concrete. There are piles of sand scattered around and old wooden planks leaning against the walls. Everything is covered in dirt and dust, and the air smells like cement mixed with dampness and something rotten. When we were younger, we used to play hide and seek in there all the time. It was just another place to mess around in. However, as time passed, we began to sense that there was something unusual about that house. Years later, my cousin C and D, our friend L, and I got into watching Sam and Colby. We had a strong interest in the paranormal, and one day we decided to explore the side of the house that had always given us an unsettling feeling. We were more excited than scared. The moment we stepped into the yard, D said his back was stinging. When we lifted his shirt, there were 5 red scratch marks across it. They were fresh. He could not have done it himself, and we were nowhere near the fence. We knew something was off, but we still went in. Inside, it was silent except for our footsteps echoing. There was this old covered bucket sitting in one of the rooms. We poked it with a stick, and when it fell over, a thick, brown, watery substance spilled out. The smell hit us instantly. It smelled like actual shit, like someone had just laid a thick one right there. We ran outside gagging, grabbed our spare pants, tied them around our faces like masks, and went back in. Every time we went back, someone got hurt. Scratches, small cuts, and bruises that appeared out of nowhere. Everyone got hurt except for me. I was the only one who was perfectly fine physically, which made it even stranger later on. We decided to try that card game from Sam and Colby. I do not remember what we pulled, but we could all feel it. Something was there. A few weeks later, during prayers, they said I had an attachment. We prayed again to get rid of it. I think it worked, but sometimes I still feel like something might be around me. After that, the aunt who resides on the opposite side of the house began to hear the sound of a baby crying from that location at night. No one lives there. We stopped going in after that. Well, mostly. At the end of this year, we are hosting a sleepover for our cousin, and we have already decided to return. What could be living/lurking inside abandoned man-made tunnels? So I remember one time when I was still a child, I was having a vacation with my family in the coastal area of West Sumatra. That's when we came upon this abandoned communication facility, lighthouse thing. I don't know what building it is yet. I was with my cousins. Being curious little ones, we went to investigate. There's a hole in the ground not far from the building filled with garbage and a cracked china plate. My cousin commented that the plate is a symbol that there is a paranormal entity. Maybe this is connected to what we found out next. We went to the building and found out that it is locked. We went behind it and found stairs made of stones going down. The building is sitting on a ledge facing the ocean, and we found several dark tunnels that I recall were made of bricks. We were amused and oohed and awed, and we decided to scream hellos and haze into the tunnel when we received the reply of what I can describe as loud, inhuman, guttural screaming from the tunnel. And it sounded like more than one voice screaming back at us in unison. We were terrified and ran like hell, screaming and crying up the stairs back to our parents. I don't remember going back there and seeing anything coming out of that tunnel. Years passed, and I don't think many of us remembered the event. Was it just a dream? Or was it something else only a child could listen to? Our parents didn't seem to believe, but we drove away shortly after that. And what about that china plate? Did my cousin make that up? Maybe you guys know something? Thank you for listening to this. I'd like to know your opinion. Good old Blue, a true story. When my best friend and I were around 13 or 14 years old, we were running around in his backyard, playing in the late afternoon hours. His property was 1 or 2 acres, but it was more of a narrow strip with a very long front yard and a very long backyard. Also, the trees were super tall pines, so we could see a great distance away with no lower branches or leaves in the way. We made our way around until we saw something on the far edge of the property. It moved quickly, and we couldn't tell what it was. Feeling adventurous, we sprinted ahead until we reached the old wooden fence that surrounded his property, looking out into an old lot with red clay and tufts of tall gray weeds everywhere. I told my buddy that it was probably a squirrel or low-flying bird that we saw when he silently grabbed the shoulder of my sleeve with a jerk. I had never seen this expression on his face before, as he stared away from me and into the lot ahead. I froze in fear of his reaction and slowly looked out into the abandoned lot. It was like seeing something out of the corner of our eyes. Blurry, yet distinct. The form of a ruddy red dog appeared to burst from nowhere, at full speed, visible for only a few swift bounds before it disappeared. The figure did not slow down or duck behind a tree, as there was nothing there to really obstruct our view. We saw this happen a couple of times, the blurry form of a dog at full gait appearing from nowhere as if frames of a movie had been cut, just to suddenly disappear with no trace. Then, it was over. The whole thing had been 10 seconds at most, but there was no sound whatsoever, and no dust stirred up from the commotion. We slowly climbed over the fence, keeping a steady eye ahead, looking for dangers or the sign of any other movement. We both stopped simultaneously at the spot where we had seen the dog sprinting, but there were no paw marks in the dusty old red clay. Our tennis shoes left a mark, and my friend's hand left a mark as he brushed it along the ground, but there was no trace of anything having passed through there. We sprinted back inside the house, with his mother otherwise engaged on the phone and not interested in our tall tales. We decided to keep hush about it until we could determine if it really was just a shared imaginary moment or not, although he and I were not really prone to flights of fancy such as this. It was about a week later when he called me on the phone and told me something that chilled me to the bone. Apparently he was walking to the neighbor's house down the road to drop off some things they had asked to borrow, a lawn trimmer or something like that. He minded his business and kept quiet, but just before departing the neighbor's front porch while saying their goodbyes, my friend asked them a question. "Do you happen to have a dog?" They said no, that they had an indoor cat but no dogs. When they asked him why he wanted to know, he told them what they had seen. My friend's mother began to sort of swat at him, saying he shouldn't be goofing around and telling stories, but she stopped when she saw the serious look on the older gentleman's face. He said, "No, ma'am, let him tell it." My friend repeated the story when the man replied, "Oh, yes, I have seen him. He's my father's old hunting dog, good old Blue. Blue died in a barn fire 40 or 50 years ago. The property in question spans the area behind your place. Over the years, we've encountered him a few times, especially since the land has undergone some clearing. I've tried calling out for him, but he never came when I called, yelling, 'Here, Blue. Hey here, Blue. Maybe if you try it, he'll stop and come over to you.' We never saw good old Blue again, although we spent the next few weeks looking, watching, and calling 'Here Blue. Hey here Blue.'" The abandoned 3M plant incident. My brother and his girlfriend and I finally had a night last Saturday to go explore this abandoned Kodak/3M/chemical treatment plant. They got a babysitter, and we left my birthday dinner and got to the location just at dark around 9 o'clock. I had been to this location about 8 times, all but 2 alone. It always gave me weird, terrible vibes, but I somehow filmed the entire thing alone before. This night was different. Weird things always seem to happen when all 3 of us are together. The first being that we kept hearing noises as if someone were in the building. We decided to leave the main building, and upon finishing filming several smaller buildings and heading back to the main one, we saw a light moving around almost like a flashlight not casting any light, and it was moving very slowly and would disappear. We couldn't figure out what it was because we couldn't find it, and we eventually went back to the office building lobby. While standing in the heat trap at the entrance, I heard what sounded to be a loud metal on metal screech and bang. Steph and Brandon both did not hear the sound, which seemed really strange because it was so loud and realistic that there was no way I could have imagined it. At certain points, we would also start freaking out and feeling uneasy, as if someone were chasing us. Later on in the factory we were filming one last section when all of a sudden Steph was thrown into a panic attack, and we had to rush out of the building. The air in the building was extremely thick, and this factory is huge. The rooms were open and probably 3 to 4 stories high. The really weird stuff came when we were leaving. We saw a white figure darting around the road near my parked car, which was located at the factory in the remote, forested area of West Virginia. As we were getting in the car, the facade of the building in the distance suddenly lit up like headlights on it, except it didn't make sense as the gates were all welded shut. It quickly disappeared. We get in the car and turn it on. The radio is strangely on AM 1400. I never use AM, so this was weird, and we had been talking earlier that night about AM stations and weird broadcasts happening on them. The station was playing a dude talking about endings and weird happenings in a place called Baker Road. At one point, the station had a 14-year-old boy call in, during which he discussed watching the world end, laughing, and how happy everyone was about dying. While driving, everyone felt terrible. All of a sudden, a firework-like thing flew up and disappeared. The entire night was very strange. Something is not right about that house. This happened about a year ago. A year ago, my friends and I were in our prime for trying to contact spirits to confirm their existence. However, we received more than we expected. I would estimate that this occurred in January or February of 2019. There is an abandoned house down the road that all my friends and I were fascinated by because we had never heard of anyone going inside. So one day we looked around the outside of the house. Keep in mind we had to trespass to get to the house. Anyways, we've tried to get in but had no way to get in until a few weeks later. My friend Dylan told me that he, Adam, and Dakota pulled off an old air conditioning unit from the window. We planned to go in that night, and we did. They were telling me how the house has to be haunted. Well, I didn't believe it at first. The house was very messy and cluttered. I have pictures and videos of inside the house on a crappy old iPod that I have somewhere in my room. The house was so messy that we never actually saw the floor. It was at least 2 feet of just random things, from pictures to dressers and broken glass. We walked over to the front door and pushed a dresser over for easier access next time, even though we had to break the glass on the door to get in easier due to the trash everywhere. We went upstairs. To be honest, I felt just fine like that. I could go there by myself and be fine. While there, we found a broken rifle and thought it was pretty cool. Well, we then kept walking around upstairs and decided to hang out in the bedroom and smoke some weed. Well, we didn't even end up smoking more than a bowl with 4 people. We then decided to leave, and the moment we said, "Let's go," I was hit by an overwhelming wave of fear, as if something were smacking me in the face. It felt like whatever was in the house didn't want us to leave, and well, that wasn't a good feeling. We then made our way back downstairs and went to climb out the window. Of course, since I was being nice, I let my friends go first while I went last. That was a mistake because when I climbed out, I turned around and felt a strong urge to know what was in the boarded up basement. We didn't go into that basement for a couple of weeks. I swear I saw something out of the corner of my eye, so I quickly hopped out the window, and when we got outside, we all agreed that something was wrong there. Later that night I was about to hop into the shower when I looked in the mirror and noticed scratches. Confused, I was wondering if the glass cut me in the window, but we pushed all the glass out, and there were no rips or anything. There were 2 scratches. It looked as if you took 3 fingers and scratched my back. It went from my shoulder to my lower back, and I decided not to tell my friends so I wouldn't scare them or make them think I was crazy. The next morning we were going to school, and Dylan said, "Dude, Dakota has scratches on his back all over," and I told him to show me. He did, and my heart dropped, realizing they were the exact same as mine, in the same spot and everything. I told them I did too and showed them mine. They freaked out, and a junior sitting not too far from us asked, "Wait, what house were you guys exploring?" We told him which one, and he told us that a murder happened, that's why it's abandoned, and that rifle we found might have been involved, but I doubt that. We returned to that house many times, every time getting worse. My brother's experience at an abandoned hospital. This story is from my brother and happened a few years ago. He and some friends, 2 girls, 3 guys, including him, decided to go one night and check out an abandoned hospital in central New Jersey. They get there, get on the grounds, then just hang out outside the buildings. After a while, a police car shows up, they get seen, and 3 of them dash into the building. 1 guy and 1 girl stayed outside and hid under a walkway. It was funny, actually. The police were too scared to go in, so they just paced around the perimeter, hopped back in their car, then left. My brother was one of them who ran into the building. He went into one of the front rooms where he could watch the police car. While he was in there, he said he saw a different shadow appear on the wall next to him. He freaked out and tried punching it, then bolted to another room. Not long after the police left, my brother and one of the guys who ran into the building met out front but didn't see anyone else, particularly the girl who ran into the building with them. The guy and girl who hid under the walkway had gone home, and I'm not sure whether they knew or not. So basically, they had to go find her. They checked just about the entire main building, calling out her name. They then decided to go to a second building, which was the trauma unit. When they went in, they found a big room, so big their flashlight couldn't see the end walls. They had a crummy friction flashlight that required them to shake it to keep it running. They get somewhere around the middle of the room when they hear footsteps coming towards them. They think it's the girl, so they start calling her name. The footsteps stop, then start coming from a different direction. They stop again and start coming from another direction, then another, and suddenly it sounds like they're surrounded by footsteps coming towards them. Both of them freak out, hold each other's hands, and run out of the building together. That was the paranormal part. They still hadn't found the girl, though, so they had to keep looking. The only place they hadn't checked was the lower floor of the main building, which was partially flooded. They found her crying in the morgue without a flashlight. I don't think she experienced anything, but I'm sure it was terrifying. A friend and I made a 1,600-mile trip to pick up a very expensive, highly bred hunting puppy to train it. The breeder was unavailable to meet with me the day I arrived, so we had to kill a lot of time in this little town in Minnesota named Cannon Falls. We drove around, and about the only place in the entire town that looked like you could kill an hour or 2 in was the city museum, which was housed in a tiny old 19th century 2-story brick firehouse. We messed around on the first floor for a while, occasionally hearing people talking on the second floor. The firehouse was narrow with a single staircase on one side of the inside wall leading to the second floor. No one could go up or down the staircase without being seen. After a while, I began to wonder what could be keeping those people so interested on the second floor, since the first floor was mostly filled with personal items that families likely wanted to keep, such as old World War I photos and pictures of unknown individuals sitting in a truck in the middle of a field, items that would only be interesting to those who knew the subjects in the photos. Most of it looked like someone had cleaned out an attic and just didn't want to throw any of it in the garbage. I had been waiting for the people upstairs to come down so that I wouldn't be stuck making small talk or complimenting them on their rather unremarkable museum if they were from Cannon Falls. Anyway, it had been a while since we'd heard any voices, and, not having anything else to do, I figured we might as well go upstairs and look at whatever junk they had up there even if we had to say hello to the folks upstairs. So we go upstairs, and you guessed it, no one was up there. I am not suggesting this had anything to do with the voices, but there was this creepy coffin-shaped container made out of wicker. It was for carrying a body around, and I forgot what its specific purpose was, but it had some particular function in the funeral business. I had never seen or heard of anything like that before. So, I don't know whether the little museum was haunted or not, but we definitely were under the impression that there were people on the second floor, so much so that we were waiting for them to clear out before we went up there to share the close quarters with them. I should note that the building did not have a shared wall with any other structure, so the sounds we heard could not have been caused by noise bleeding through from a neighboring building. Stuff goes down at the abandoned house. There is this old abandoned house kind of near where I live, and I had been wanting to explore it for quite some time. I certainly didn't expect any paranormal stuff, I only went in for the fun of it, really. So I gathered up 3 friends and tried to find a way in. There was a relatively large hole in the door, so we decided that this was our way to get inside. Since nobody else would, I climbed through first. Inside the house, it was all dark and smelled weird. We appeared to be in some kind of small hallway, with a cabinet to one side up against the wall. Once everyone else was in, we started to explore around the house a bit. We found nothing out of the ordinary, except for a bird that was trapped inside, presumably because it got in through the door hole. After a few unsuccessful attempts to free the bird, 2 of my friends left due to boredom, leaving just the 2 of us in the house. We went around looking for a net or something to get the bird out and came to a small room that led to outside. Note, The door was closed, and we opened it to get into this room. My friend went in and I stayed outside and continued searching for a net. I didn't actually see the door close, but I heard my friend yelling and saying it was locked. I ran back to the room and told him to open the outside door. He did and met up back with me in the main area of the house. We both decided to screw around a bit at this point. Maybe we were both scared but didn't want to show it, I don't know. Then a door at the other end of the house just opened by itself. We both looked at each other, ran to the door, and closed it. We started walking back, and it opened again. Now we panicked. We ran back to get the two that left and told them about what's happening. We all went back, and I climbed through first again. This time there was something greasy on the door, like oil. It got all over my clothes and was on the ground around the door as well. I immediately asked everyone if they knew anything about it. One smelled it and said it was piss. We went in again and tried to find anything else. At one point, I heard a baby crying, but I attributed it to someone in the street or a neighbor. Nothing happened until we were all in one room together, then a dangling light started to swing. And we heard 2 loud knocks on the walls. I was about to say it's just the bird, but then I saw that the bird was with us. Then one of my friends walked off, only to sprint back screaming, "There's a baby in the wall." We all bolted after that, never to return to that house again. Possible encounter with a spirit at an abandoned asylum. There is an abandoned asylum just outside our village, and a friend and I decided to take a look. We both love to do parkour, and we really wanted to climb on top of this thing. So we did. After a few times we went there, nothing happened. The asylum did appear somewhat intimidating, however, this is a common characteristic of old, abandoned structures. Despite this, we continued our visits without experiencing any unusual encounters or noises. Until last Sunday. We were parking our bikes next to the building and walked around it to the back, where we most of the time would climb, so after like 2 hours we climbed back down and started to walk back to our bikes. When we started to notice there were other small buildings around the asylum hidden in the woods, we also noticed a small bunker-like building with leaves and grass covering it, so we decided to check it out. We walked down the staircase leading up to a door that would lead into the bunker. Surprisingly, it was not locked, so we opened it. After we entered and turned on our flashlights due to the darkness, we noticed a small room at the end of the hallway, which appeared to contain a cell where prisoners might have been held. We looked at each other and decided to walk towards the small room at the end of the hallway to check it out, but then my friend suddenly spoke to me. He felt a very cold breath on his neck and began to experience pain in his stomach. I told him to stay calm when suddenly I started to get a huge headache out of nowhere. The room began to feel very cold, and we both ran back to the door, up the stairs, and back to our bikes. We did not look back for a second and did not stop running until we were at our bikes. Then we looked at each other, still in shock, and we did not know what to say. After a few minutes of silence we went back home. I have not been to the area ever since. And the event that happened down there in that small bunker will always be in my brain. Strange figure after hours on a golf course. My family and I were staying at a fancy resort in California on vacation. I don't remember the name of the resort, as I was a small child at the time and don't remember all the details. It was around 11:30. My parents were having dinner with their friends, and it seemed like they would be there for a while. I, being the Indiana Jones obsessed kid I was, decided to leave my parents and go exploring. Now, the restaurant we were at was close to the golf course and was a 5-minute walk away. I made my way to the golf course and began running in the dark and looking for treasure and pretending I was on a quest. After about 10 minutes, I was sort of in the middle of the golf course. I would say somewhere around the 7th hole. Around this time, I noticed something that seemed very strange to me. I saw a very tall man dressed in all black standing with his back turned away from me. This seemed off to me, because I knew that everything was supposed to be closed. I started walking toward it when he turned around at an almost inhuman speed. This scared me, and I felt my little heart drop. The man had awful stubble and looked really unkempt. If you're wondering how I could see these things, it was a full moon and brighter out than usual. The man looked at me confused at first, then finally said, "Hey, little buddy." His voice was so scratchy, like he had been gargling nails. He shifted on his feet and said, "Sorry, kid, I work here. Wanna come see where the arcade is? We've got a special secret one no one knows about." This sounded great to me, but one thing made me uneasy. I had seen every uniform there was for the hotel over the past couple days, and this man was definitely not wearing one. He looked almost homeless. However, I, being a young naive child, stepped toward the man. As I did this, I looked at the man's face. I stopped dead in my tracks. He had the widest, scariest, most perverted, and craziest smile I had ever seen. I took one look at his face and bolted away. I heard footsteps behind me first, but not rapid ones. It sounded like he was walking instead of running. I didn't look back. My parents hadn't even noticed I was gone. My parents noticed my fear and asked what was wrong. I told them that the night worker on the golf course was really scary. One of the waiters overheard me, and this part still gives me chills. The waiter said, "We don't have any night workers on the golf course." We left the resort 2 days later. Nothing happened after this, however, I still remember that event to this day. I still wonder, what would have happened to me if I had gone with that man? We conducted our first ever paranormal investigation last night. I won't lie, it felt very awkward because the 2 members of staff wanted to join us to watch but not take part, and it felt very awkward having them stand in the doorway to every room just watching us in silence. They left about 30 minutes before we ended, so they were there for the majority of it. I feel like I would have felt less pressure if they weren't there, but it is what it is. Here is a brief summary of everything that happened. Our investigation began in Gallery 1, where we set up an EMF reader and motion balls. While we didn't get any interaction with the motion balls throughout the night, the EMF reader immediately showed signs of activity in this room, even maxing out on several occasions. We then moved on to Gallery 2, the room with all the tables. Although we had previously described it as generally inactive, this room turned out to be the most active of the night. The EMF reader gave consistent and responsive activity. We were able to get it to spike on command. We believe the spirit with us may have been Harriet, as each time we asked, "If this is Harriet, touch the green light," the EMF would max out. When we asked it to stop, the activity would immediately cease. This happened repeatedly and on command, which felt significant. Afterward, we moved to Gallery 3 upstairs, which had little to no activity, despite prior reports of it being one of the more active rooms. We continued down the corridor and climbed a ladder into the clock tower, where the mechanism is still manually maintained today. There were no signs of activity in this space. Next, we investigated the main room, historically noted for being the most active location. However, we experienced minimal activity here. The EMF reader went off a few times, but the strength and consistency were far less than downstairs. This could be due to the building's history as former stables. The upstairs may not have been used much in that era. An unexpected event occurred here. I returned to the room alone and placed a GoPro facing the door with a motion sensor in its view. As I left, the door, which had been firmly wedged open, slammed shut behind me. It required effort to close manually, so this was highly unusual and, thankfully, caught on camera. We conducted an Estes method session in this room, though the responses were vague and largely nonsensical. Later, we returned to Gallery 1 for a final Estes session. This time, we received more responses. One particularly striking moment was when I said, "Trees, by the house, knock," and over during the session. Afterward, we were told a tree had fallen and hit the building only a few months prior, a detail we had not known before. We ended the night outside by the fountain, where sightings of a gray lady have been reported. We picked up more EMF activity in this area. We are incredibly grateful to the staff at Castle Park Arts Center for allowing us to conduct this investigation and for their support, stories, and generosity in giving us access without a fee. We're very thankful for the opportunity to film on site and would be more than happy to return or assist with any future events if our schedules allow. We are also very interested in returning to the site, hopefully with more team members, to see if we can uncover more information from the activity we experienced and perhaps get more meaningful responses through the Estes method. I saw a house disappear. My friend Jacob and I go out biking in a forest near my house because it's pretty big and has some nice trails. We'd been biking around for about an hour when we realized we were kind of lost, so we stopped to try and figure out where we were at. He was trying the map app on his phone when I noticed a house not too far off the trail. My friend's phone wasn't having any luck with connecting, so we decided to walk over to the house to check if someone could point us back to the right area. We knocked on the door, and like a horror movie, the door creaked open. We walked in asking if anyone was there and then realized the place was empty. It was mostly furnished, but it looked pretty old, and the fridge was rancid. My friend finds a staircase leading up a floor, and we decide to go up and check that part of the place out. The second I put my foot on the staircase, I felt nauseous. I almost fell over because of how bad it felt. My friend helps me walk out of the place, but I collapse outside on the ground and start vomiting. My friend is trying to help me from falling into my vomit, and once I was done, I sat back and tried to get air. That was when my friend turned around and just mumbled, "Holy shit, dude." I turn around, and the entire house is gone. Like, not even was there dirt and stuff that proved the house was there. I mean, it looked like the house was never there in the first place. There was even a tree growing in a spot where the corner of the place was. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there staring at the ground. That was when I realized I had taken a picture of the place on my phone, so I pulled it out, trying to see if I had actually taken a picture or not. It was just a picture of the ground covered in dead leaves and grass. We decided that moving was better than staying there, and after probably half an hour or so we found our way back to the trails we knew. I've got no idea what the hell that was. Has anyone else seen this? I can't be the only one, right? The rocks. In 2014, 3 friends and I decided to spontaneously drive out to the Mojave Desert and camp out there. There is a pit stop out there called Ludlow, which consists of a gas station and a fast food place. By the time we got there, it was probably 9 p.m. and dark. We drove out on a dirt road outside of the gas station about a half-mile away. We gathered firewood and dried sticks, dug a fire hole into the ground, and started a little campfire. All was going great. We had our soup by the fire warming up. We had a BB gun that we were using to shoot cans that we found out there scattered around, and we also had a blank handgun. It just shoots blank cartridges but was fun to pop off. Nothing out of the ordinary. Things changed after the fire randomly went out. We were left in pitch blackness until we could get it lit again. All of a sudden, I heard something. The sound of a small rock landing and rolling a little across the desert ground, not far away. I put it in the back of my mind as something to pay attention to. Then, about 5 minutes later, I heard it again. It was the pitter-patter of a small rock landing and rolling across the desert ground. This time I said something. Nobody else had heard it. I said, "I'm pretty sure I just heard a rock landing near us." It didn't take long for another rock to fall. This time 2 of them heard it. Then, another rock. The intervals between were getting closer. We all were aware of it now, and the mood had shifted considerably. We were all now on high alert, aware that there was a presence out there with us. We all had the feeling like something was watching us just outside of the light of our fire. It was uncomfortable. We decided to split up into 2 groups of 2, not too far away, and do a perimeter search with our flashlights. There was nothing but sparsely separated sagebrush out there, no taller than 5 feet at most. We scanned the area, and while scanning, I could hear rocks landing between our 2 groups. We checked behind bushes and lit up every area with our flashlight. There was nothing. These rocks didn't sound like they were being thrown from a distance, it sounded like they were being tossed at us from 15 feet away. While we were looking around, I noticed that the scrap metal sheet we were using as a backboard for shooting cans no longer had the cans in front of it. They had been piled up behind the scrap metal. There is no way a human being could be sneaking around us like that at night. We would have heard them and caught them with our flashlights. We regrouped by my car, which was next to the fire, trying to figure out what was going on and what we should do. All the while, the sound of a rock landing every 3 minutes, the sounds were getting more frequent and closer to us. We decided whatever this was didn't want us there. So we got in my car and drove back to the gas station. I immediately went inside and told the clerk about what had happened to us. He basically said that side of the desert is haunted. There were Chinese miners, back in the 19th century, who died in the mines up in the hills about 5 miles away. I got back to my car and told the guys. We were all in shock and couldn't believe this actually happened to us. It was a surreal feeling, like the hairs standing up on our necks. I wanted to go back, and most of us did too, out of curiosity. When we got back to the site, the fire was out, it was pitch black and quiet. We sort of loitered around waiting for something to happen. Then it did, but this time the sounds were much closer and more frequent, about every minute, and the rocks falling were heavier. 2 of us were standing next to the smoldering fire, and I and another friend were by a tall bush. We all felt like we were testing fate and challenging whatever this was. All of a sudden, what sounded like a fist-sized rock came over the bush we were standing next to and rolled by my friend's foot. We both looked at each other, and without a word, both went around opposite sides of this bush with our flashlights. Nothing. At that moment, the other 2 began yelling and ran back to my car, prompting us to all start running in that direction as well. They said a big rock landed in the embers. It was a mad rush, and we reversed out of there the whole way back to the gas station and slept in my car. The next day we explored the mines in the hills the clerk told us about. It was legit. There were mines there, and we discovered an article about the mine collapsing on Chinese workers there. My house is built over ancient burial grounds. When they were digging for the foundations, they found ancient bones scattered about and ancient funerary items. Yet besides that, I still remember one of my stranger experiences all too well. Several years back, during 9 to 10 p.m., I was alone in my bedroom, changing my shirt. My bedroom door was left slightly open. As I was changing, from the side of my eye, I could see my bedroom door very gradually opening. From the side of my eye, I saw a person's head very slowly peeking through. I immediately turned to look, and I see the face of a woman whom I've never seen before. Her face was fully pale white, her hair midnight black, and she was rather tall and willowy. The moment I locked eyes with her, in just a moment, she immediately pulled her head back. I rushed toward my bedroom door, yet once there, I found no one standing there. I looked through the hallway leading to my bedroom, and it was completely empty. I walked through the hallway, which led to the living room where some of my family members were sitting, talking, and watching TV. I asked them, "Did any of you see someone pass through the hallway?" They looked at me strangely and replied, "No," and then I asked, "Did anyone open my bedroom door by any chance?" And they responded, "No, why? Did something happen?" Here I just stood there and tried my best to brush it off. In another instance, not far from this occurrence, once I was asleep in my bedroom at night, I felt the bed shaking, a common occurrence, which I tend to try my best to ignore. However, during that specific night, I felt a really sharp, excruciating pain on my shoulder that lasted for several seconds. During the morning time, I touched my shoulder, but the pain was gone, and I thought to myself that that was a really strange dream. After a light breakfast, I wanted to take a shower. Once I was in my bathroom, I took my shirt off, and in the large bathroom mirror, I noticed something peculiar on one of my shoulders. I crept closer to the mirror and saw a sizable purple/bluish bruise on my right shoulder. And upon closer inspection, I could see the imprint of teeth, and I quickly realized that this is a bite mark. I then realized that this bite mark was the source of the excruciating pain I had felt while asleep the previous night. Yet what's most bizarre is that I sleep alone in my bedroom, and the door is always locked. Something is messing around with me. For a few months now, I've had a few weird experiences happen to me, so I figured I'd share them here. For some context, I do live with my grandmother. We live in a trailer park near some old abandoned mines in a forest. According to some old maps, there is a mine directly below us. I do vaguely remember hearing about deaths. Our trailer has only one floor, with no attic or basement. Each door has 4 locks, the windows are always closed, and we had an alarm system for years, so there was no way anyone could have gotten inside. The kitchen and living room are connected, the door to my grandmother's room is in the living room, and the only hallway is to my room. The first time something happened to me was in the living room at about 5:30 a.m. It was still very dark and hard to see. My cat was sitting in my lap, and I was reading something when out of the corner of my eye I saw a black shadow peeking out from behind a chair and just watching me. When my cat and I looked at them, they ducked back behind the chair so they wouldn't be seen. I couldn't exactly go back to my room since the shadow went in that direction. I continued to see the same shadow watching me until around 7 a.m. The next day in the bathroom I heard something move. Once I heard heavy footsteps, like someone wearing boots, walk up to my door and stop. I never heard them walk away, and the motion sensor light beside my door never turned on. My grandma does not wear boots in the house, nor does she walk like that. I don't think she was even awake yet. I had also heard footsteps walking around in the living room in circles at around 2 a.m. That night I was sleeping in my grandmother's room and could see her about 5 feet away from me. I did see the shadow again, this time it was in my room. I saw them in the corner, and again, they ducked to avoid being seen when I looked in that direction. I decided to see if they would appear again, so I looked around my room, not really paying attention to anything specific. The shadow reappeared at the foot of my bed and, yet again, ducked when I looked at it. I saw another shadow in the corner of my room on the ceiling. This time it was just a head with what looked like 6 horns, which, admittedly, really threw me off. What freaked me out the most happened in October or November while I was in the kitchen. My grandmother was outside speaking with someone. I was reading something at the table. I had been resting my foot on a chair, and I had not moved at all. I'm certain I didn't, when I felt the chair get pulled away from the table like someone grabbed it and yanked it back. I genuinely almost had a heart attack. I've gotten the feeling of being watched for quite a while. Since I was younger, at about 7 to 8 years old, I vaguely remember hearing a voice from under my bed when I was 4, but I'm not entirely convinced that meant anything since I was still very little. I've heard tapping on my walls at night. Once someone knocked on my door at night, a single knock, and the motion sensor did not turn on. I heard a very loud slamming sound, like a car door slamming shut, go up and down the street, and no one else heard anything. Even my grandma thought she heard my door get slammed shut last night at around 1:30. I was definitely awake at the time and was nowhere near my door. I heard nothing. Every cat and dog we've had has also had the habit of staring in corners at nothing. One of our dogs would even bark at empty corners. Overall, I don't get any sort of feeling that anything is trying to hurt me, but I can't be sure since I'm incredibly new to this and kind of freaked out. Goulburn Mental Hospital, Australia. I live in Goulburn, Australia, a town well known for being haunted, probably because it's the first inland city of Australia, but in Goulburn there is an old mental hospital called Kenmore Asylum, which has had a horrific past but is now closed and abandoned. One day my mates and I thought it would be fun to explore the abandoned buildings. While looking around, we found a 2-story building, but the only way to get to the top story is by a staircase along the side of the building. My mates and I decided to sprinkle flour on the stairs because we thought it would be funny. The next day we came back, and there were footprints leading down the stairs as if someone had been inside the building while we were there. It may not seem like much, but when I start thinking about it, it always freaks me out. I know it's not much of a story, but I just wanted to tell it. I have many more stories about Goulburn, but they didn't happen to me, only my friends and family. But if you guys have any questions or want more stories, just let me know. Thanks. My friend said his grandfather never left that house. I grew up in a small Bulgarian town, and when we were teenagers, we used to go exploring old factories, abandoned schools, and that kind of thing. You know, dumb stuff. One of my friends, Miro, said his grandma had this house out in the countryside, a few kilometers from town. Nobody had lived there since his grandpa died. He said we could go there for the weekend, no one will bother us, we can drink and smoke in peace. The moment we saw the place, I got this weird feeling. The kind where your stomach sinks before anything even happens. It was one of those old 1-story houses with a broken fence and a yard full of weeds taller than your knees. The windows were covered in grime, and there was this musty smell that hit you as soon as you opened the door. Inside, everything was exactly how someone might have left it 50 years ago, old wooden furniture, yellowed lace curtains, and family photos so faded you couldn't make out the faces. On the wall in the living room was a big round clock. Its hands were stuck at 12. We joked about ghosts at first, like any group of teenage idiots. But after midnight, when the laughter died down and the beer cans emptied, it got quiet. Too quiet. Around 1 a.m., I went outside to take a leak. I remember how bright the moon was. The air was still, almost heavy. I was zipping up when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. Turned around. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the grass. I went back inside and told Miro someone was walking around the yard. He looked at me dead serious and said the following. That's normal. It's just Grandpa. He died here, but he never really left. I laughed at first, waiting for him to crack a smile. He didn't. Before I could even say anything, something thumped from the next room. A heavy sound, like a chair tipping over. We all looked at each other. That room was completely empty. Then came another sound, a slow dragging, like wood scraping across the floor. And then, tick. We turned toward the old wall clock. Its second hand, which had been frozen since we got there, started moving. Not forward. Not backward. But both. Tick-tock. Tock-tick. Tick-tock. One of the guys said, "What the hell," under his breath. The sound filled the room, louder and louder, echoing off the walls like there were 100 clocks ticking out of sync. That's when the lights flickered. No one said a word. We just ran outside. We lit cigarettes with shaking hands. The night felt colder now, like the air itself had changed. Miro lit one extra cigarette and stuck it upright in the dirt. "For Grandpa," he said quietly. We stood there watching it burn. The tip glowed red, then faded, then glowed red again, as if someone were taking slow drags. When it burned down to the filter, Miro just stared at the ash. After a while, we decided to go back in. The living room felt different, heavier somehow. The air smelled faintly like smoke, though none of us had smoked inside. And the clock. It was working again. The hands were moving. Smoothly. 2:57 a.m. We just stood there, staring. And when the hands reached 3 o'clock exactly, the ticking stopped. That perfect silence, I still remember it. You don't notice how loud silence can be until it feels alive. Miro's face went pale. He just said, "He's gone," and walked outside. We left not long after that. None of us said much on the way home. It's been years, and that house is probably gone now, but sometimes, when I'm up late and the world's dead quiet, I swear I can hear that same clock ticking. Tick-tock. Tock-tick. I don't believe in ghosts. But I never asked Miro what happened to his grandpa. And I don't plan to. A little girl in a white gown appeared late at night. My best friend grew up in a nice subdivision that we would explore all the time. We discovered early on that this graveyard was fenced off in the middle of his neighborhood, not too far from the neighborhood playground when we would play. Fast forward to high school, when my father and I were heading to their house after a basketball game one evening to spend some time together. Mind you, it's 11 p.m. and pitch black in this neighborhood when we pull up. We get out of the car, and I notice over by this tree in their yard this little girl, clear as day, in an old-looking white gown, and I ask my dad why this little girl is just outside this late at night. So he notices her too and calls out to her, but she just stares at us, so we go inside, and he asks if any of their neighbors have a young daughter, but none of the neighbors did. So we go back out to see where she went, and she was nowhere to be found. Fast forward a couple more years, and my dad gets a call from my friend's mom saying she just had the weirdest conversation with someone in their neighborhood, and he brought up the graveyard and how one of the families buried in that graveyard in the neighborhood had a little girl no older than the girl we saw buried there with them. To this day, it still gives my dad and me chills. 2 friends and I had an experience in a long abandoned house. I was exploring an abandoned house with 2 friends on one of their family's farms. This property spans over 100 acres in rural North Carolina and has been a home to his family for generations. There is a house on this farm that was abandoned many years ago, as far as any living relative can remember. The story goes that the people who lived in the house were involved in the illegal production of alcohol during Prohibition, and the house was shut up during that time as a result of a dispute. After the attack on the home, it was abandoned with all furniture and belongings. There is no documentation, but plenty of very old bullet holes and bullets stuck in the walls to support this, but it is an understanding in the family that everyone in that house at the time experienced a violent traumatic death. Now that the context of the house has been established, I will describe our experiences there. On Saturday evening, 10/2016, we were hanging out when we started talking about this abandoned house. Both of my friends had been in the house before, and I expressed interest in checking it out. They agreed to take me. It was about a 10-minute walk from the main farmhouse, so we took off towards the house. This is a small house, 2 stories, less than 800 square feet in total. It's dark but a decent moon, and I can see from the outside that the house is in rough structural condition, with damage to some of the walls and the porch collapsed. The only door that wasn't blocked was already open, which was concerning, but we entered anyway. Since my friends had been in, someone had stapled up tarps blocking the other doors inside the house. We looked around the first room and took a couple of pictures. The stairs to the second story were in the first room, and we peeked up there. We wanted to explore a little upstairs, but the stability of the floor didn't look good enough to support us, so we stuck to the ground floor. We chose to enter the room immediately to the left of the entry room, where a tarp blocked the door. I held a flashlight as one of them pulled the tarp back. As soon as he pulled the corner down, a puff of air entered from that room, and we detected a strong unpleasant odor. It smelled like death or rotting meat, strong enough that we were afraid an animal might have gotten trapped and died. We tore down the rest of the tarp and entered what would have been the living room. There was absolutely nothing in the room except for a few glass jars with fake flowers in them and nothing else noteworthy minus the many bullet holes in the walls. We snapped a few pictures, including the one that prompted this. We explored the rest of the house, a kitchen and laundry room, before heading back to the occupied farmhouse. Seemingly, nothing unusual had happened. We sat down at the kitchen table and talked about the house and flipped through the pictures we had taken until we got to the one taken in the living room. We were shocked to see what appeared to be 2 faces in the photo, as well as some distortion or corruption of the data in it. We were taken aback. I was there when the photo was taken. I am in the photo. I was with my friend who took the photo from the moment it was taken until we looked at it less than a half hour later. We took 20 or so pictures in the house, and this was the only one with anything weird. We are all a little freaked out by this and would honestly love an explanation of what could have possibly caused this image/glitch besides the ghosts of a murdered family. I went amateur ghost hunting with some friends last year in a graveyard. Nothing significant had happened for the first 2 hours we were there. As we started making our way back to our cars, I don't know if heard is the right word, but I heard a man's voice enter my thoughts and tell me we needed to leave because the living were coming. I shook it off as my imagination. But after another minute or so, a feeling of urgency flooded my body, and the thought entered my mind more loudly. It actually made me jump and look around me. Then the image of an older man in a disheveled suit entered my mind. I instinctively knew he was following our group. He then insisted we leave as quickly as possible and tell my friends. I was just kind of panicking at this point. I'd never experienced anything like that before and knew everyone wouldn't believe me. When I tried explaining this in my head to him, he grew only more urgent. He just kept repeating that the living were coming and that we were in danger. I even experienced what felt like 2 hands squeezing my spine. That's when I spoke up, because I was genuinely frightened. My friends were confused, but when I started booking it down the hill, they followed without hesitation. We got in our cars, and as we started to drive away, the man relaxed and released my spine, thanking me for listening to him. Then that was it. No more thoughts that didn't belong to me. The part that truly terrified me, though, causing my stomach to drop, was the moment I looked out the back window of the car after the man's presence disappeared and saw the outlines of 4 men walking towards where we had been walking minutes before. I had no idea whether they were dangerous or not. But I'm glad we weren't around to find out. Thank you, kind stranger, wherever you are. I hope you're able to rest in peace. Something is attacking me after I went on a tour of an abandoned schoolhouse. Last week I was very excited to go on a tour of an abandoned schoolhouse near my house. It was closed for like 12 years, and it was a very gloomy place. The tour promised a paranormal experience, but it wasn't really like that. When I arrived, there was a Beetlejuice-ish narrator that was guiding the whole thing. It was a very dirty and smelly place, and I hoped for the worst. Then when it started, all my illusions fell. The whole tour was a more theatrical insight into a kind of exorcism. Instead of feeling disappointed, I was very grateful because I had a lot of fun during the whole play. The next day, while I was cooking lunch for the family, I decided to get some water from the fridge. However, the water was at room temperature because my brother hadn't filled the water jar on time. When I let the jar sit on the table to pour a cup, it suddenly exploded, and I ended up with about 3 pieces of glass on me. I decided to clean it all up before someone noticed it, but then I realized that it was very difficult for this to happen because the jar was at room temperature and it just exploded out of nowhere. This was just the beginning, as every day brought a new issue, such as yesterday when all the plants I had cared for over the years began to wither. On the weekend, I began to hear the doorknobs of already open rooms turning and the sound of people walking on the second floor when no one was actually there. My family is worried, but they think this will go away on its own. I don't know what is happening, so I decided to think that it is a spirit that followed me to my house and is causing all these unexpected events. Does someone know what all of this means? I wanted to look, but something told me not to. For context, this happened when I was 13, so it would have been 2004. I'm half Puerto Rican, and my family often visited relatives in PR during the holidays back then. At that time, we stayed with an uncle in Vieques, a small island off the east coast of Puerto Rico. He had a beautiful house on a hillside with a small fenced area he had with goats. I loved staying there. It was high enough that I could see the open ranch land further down that harbored wild horses and a few herds of cattle before it would drop off at a cliffside beach. There were tons of large rocks and trees for me to climb. My older brother would have been 19 at the time. While my mom and I shared one room, he got a room to himself, and he has always been the type to sneak out to go exploring. So he went out one night without my mother or me knowing. However, I remember waking up because I could hear the goats outside. Normally, they'd be sleeping, but they sounded a little anxious. The sound scared me, but not nearly as much as the other sound I heard. There was a growling sound near the window. The window was open but barred, pretty common for a lot of PR homes to allow ventilation while not compromising security. Plus, it protects against flying debris during hurricanes. We were on the second story of the house, so I wasn't exactly scared because I was worried whatever it was would get to me, because it couldn't, but more that I couldn't pinpoint it. I've always been a bit of an animal nerd. I watched tons of Animal Planet and National Geographic, and I love hearing animal vocalizations. But the growl I was hearing sounded foreign. It's hard to describe. I know the sounds wild cats make, and I know the various sounds that canines make. I've heard the various, strange vocalizations that foxes make. Definitely not a bear either, plus I already knew there are no bears native to Puerto Rico. Actually, now that I really think about it, it sounded like a mix between a person growling and gargling. I didn't want to wake my mother, who was in a dead sleep. But I slipped out of bed and started to go to the window, but halfway to it, I suddenly froze. I just got this weird feeling that washed over me, and this thought entered my head. Don't look. Like I just had this feeling that I would see something that would mess me up mentally or something. Like I wouldn't be able to handle it. I went back to bed still feeling uneasy and stayed up a bit. The growling eventually seemed to drift away, and I fell asleep at some point. The next day, we find out one of the goats got attacked by something. It wasn't a gory attack. In fact, the goat was just laying there with a bite mark on the jugular. There being barely any blood spill was pretty weird. My brother also seemed uneasy that day, and he rarely seems bothered by stuff, but I told him I think I heard what killed the goat last night and how weird it sounded. He decided to tell me he snuck out last night. Basically, he told me he snuck out and went down to the pastures where the wild horses and cows were. He claimed he went out to explore, but for all I know, he might have intended to do something foolish, like attempt cow tipping. But he said that while he was out in the field, He heard the cows become restless and panicked, and when he started to feel them stampede, he ran down a sort of ditch that had a large tree in it. He only had a small flashlight with him, and it was much darker in this ditch. He claimed he saw what he thought was a person standing behind the trunk of the tree, but when he pointed his light at them, they moved out of view further behind it. He said he kept his distance but moved around the trunk and tried to see if he could see them, but no one was there. Then he felt like he was being watched and had to find his way through the dark back home. He didn't want to sneak out anymore after that. At least not in the country. He actually brought me to the exact spot during the day. The ditch was pretty mucky and damp compared to the fields higher up out of it that are dry grasslands. Most of the ditch appeared to be primarily mud, with some clay mixed in. I could clearly see various hoof prints from cows and horses in the mud, probably coming down into the ditch and under the tree to have shade and get cooled down. The mud also bore our footprints, along with a few large dog prints, which was peculiar. There's no native wild dog population in PR, but there is a large number of feral dogs, so it's possible some wandered into the ditch too. But my brother described the figure. He said he couldn't make out any hair or distinguish any clothes on them, but they had looked as if they were hunched over, maybe crouched near the ground, facing away from him on the other side of the trunk of the tree. He had only caught a brief glimpse of the figure before it pulled away when the light shone on it. Then they just seemed to disappear. I didn't see any leftover human footprints, shoe prints, or anything unusually strange, but my brother's voice was shaking when he told me the story. I asked him if he remembered that night a few years ago, because part of me, especially older me, is a little skeptical. After all, my brother used to try to scare me all the time as a kid. But lies are often hard to keep track of, so I asked what he remembered. He told me the exact same story in exact clarity and was still shaky as he retold it. He didn't add anything to the story either, which is usually something he does when he's making stuff up. I don't know what he saw. I don't know what I heard. I don't know what killed the goat. There's a part of me that thinks, chupacabra. The original descriptions of the chupacabra from eyewitnesses don't describe the canned version that turned out to be a mangy coyote-wolf hybrid. Puerto Ricans have always described something that looks more alien when it comes to their version of the chupacabra. But again, I don't know what to think. I will always remember the feeling that urged me not to look out the window. Part of me wishes I had anyway, but maybe I wouldn't have been able to handle it at 13. Who knows? My experience.
I, a 19-year-old male at the time, and a couple of buddies went to this creepy house down the street.
Like almost every neighborhood, there was that one house that nobody lived in and looked super creepy. So being the dumb kids we were, my best friend, let's call him Eric, and my buddy from work, let's call him John, went to what everyone called the Crown House. Apparently, the last owner died in the house from carbon dioxide poisoning, but people who were there, this was like 2 years ago, said they saw their face literally destroyed. I'm talking scratches all over their face. Some rumors speculated the owner did some ritual type stuff, summoning the devil and stuff. Ever since then everyone kind of stood away from the house. People who went in would never be the same, like, they would say they would hear things that weren't even there and think things that weren't their thoughts. So my buddies and I thought it was a great idea to explore. And let me tell you, what I saw was horrific. I don't want to sound like the person who believes ghosts and stuff are real. But what happened was real. Eric picked the lock to the front door. When we got in, the first thing we noticed was the smell. Rancid. Like meat that has been left out for years. And though the sun was blistering outside, it was freezing inside this house. And that's when it started. The whispers. Faint enough that you couldn't make it out, but loud enough you knew it was there. Eric and John didn't hear it at first, but after a while, they could. The lights weren't working, so we depended on the window light, but still it was dark. We were in there for 10 minutes. And within 10 minutes, this happened. We heard footsteps coming down the stairs. We ran to the nearest door, which was the basement. We were in darkness. Eric screamed. Then John screamed. Later they told me they heard a voice. Say my name. Then I felt a sharp pain in my arm. Something scratched me. Blood trickled down my arm. Something scratched John's face. We ran out there faster than ever. 2 years later I found out it's for sale again. Good luck to the homeowners for 840 Rosenbaum Bridge. I'll be praying for you. Exploring an abandoned hospital at 3 a.m. We regret it. I never planned to go there that night. It just happened. My friend and I had been talking about abandoned places for weeks. There was this old hospital outside town that had been shut down for years. People said strange things happened there, but we never really believed it. Around 2:30 in the morning, we decided to go. The drive felt longer than usual. The roads were empty, and everything felt strangely quiet. When we finally reached the hospital, it looked worse than I expected. The building was huge, dark, and broken, with shattered windows and walls covered in stains. We parked a little far and walked the rest of the way. The main entrance was locked, so we found a broken side door and stepped inside. As soon as we entered, the air felt thick and oppressive. It was difficult to articulate, but it didn't feel like we were in an empty space. We turned on our flashlights and began to walk. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and the remnants of old hospital beds lined the hallways. Old hospital beds were left in the hallways. Some doors were half open, others completely broken. It felt like the place had been abandoned in a hurry. At first, everything was quiet. Too quiet. We kept moving deeper into the building, trying to act normal, but both of us felt uneasy. I could tell my friend was nervous by the way he kept looking behind us. Then we heard it. A sound from upstairs. Slow footsteps. We both stopped and listened. It happened again. At that moment, we both knew we were not alone. We should have left, but we did not. Instead, we went upstairs. The stairs creaked loudly with every step. When we reached the second floor, the air felt colder. The hallway stretched out in front of us, long and dark. That is when my friend suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed ahead. I saw it too. A figure was standing at the end of the hallway. It was not clear, just a shape, but it was human-like. Completely still, like it was watching us. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then my flashlight flickered, and the figure was gone. We both panicked and started backing away. That is when we heard something behind us. Footsteps again, but this time closer. Much closer. We turned around, but there was nothing there. Then one of the doors slowly moved. Not fully, just enough to notice. That was it. We ran. We ran back toward the stairs without looking back. The sound of footsteps followed us, faster now. It felt like something was right behind us. We nearly fell trying to get down. When we reached the ground floor, we did not stop. We ran straight out of the building. Once outside, we finally stopped near the car, both of us breathing hard. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then my friend slowly looked up at the hospital and froze. I followed his gaze. There was someone standing at the window on the second floor. Watching us. We got into the car and drove away without saying a word. Neither of us spoke the entire way back. Even after we got home, we avoided talking about it. The next day, I checked the video on my phone. Most of it was dark and shaky, but there was one moment on the second floor where the camera pointed down the hallway. The figure was there. But that was not the worst part. As we turned to run in the video, the figure did not stay at the end of the hallway. It moved. Fast. Straight toward us. The video cut off right after that. We never went back. And we never will. My first ghost hunt. Hi, I'm Nova, and a couple of months ago my friend Chad took me on my very first ghost hunt. He runs a local group called Sunshine State Paranormal Investigations, really cool stuff. He took me to the Shingle Creek Cemetery, which is just outside of Kissimmee. It has a couple really old Confederate graves. It's been around for a long time. He and Brandon brought their equipment with them. A bunch of stuff, like EMF meters and full spectrum cameras. We got there around 11, and they gave me my EMF meter to use. I was super excited. I had never been on a hunt before. It's pretty important to note that as soon as we got there, I had my EMF meter on and had 0 readings. The first place we had checked was the grave of a girl who had died in the 70s. They went over to go check out her grave and set up a camera to record any activity while we checked out the rest of the cemetery. I stayed off to the side, trying to not get in the way. I then heard someone running behind me, like really booking it with boots or something. Really heavy footsteps. It was super loud. I turned around and didn't see anything. I'm still on the fence about that one because it could have been a big bird like a hawk or something flying really close behind me, but I'm pretty dubious about that. Whatever it was super cool. After that, we went to the Confederate side to visit a grave that had had a lot of activity the last time Chad and they had been there. It was the grave of a man named Peter. I can't remember his last name. There are 2 small flags on either side of his headstone, and they said that they were able to see the flag on the left move with no wind. The flags are so close together that if it were windy, they should both move. We went there and said hi. Brandon said he heard a response on the EVP. We checked it out after we got home, and there was a response after we asked if anyone was there. After that we were just asking questions and stuff when the left flag started moving again. It was a really funny movement. It wasn't a waving motion but like someone had picked up the corner of the flag and pulled it up. Brandon went over to see if there was wind movement next to the flag and said it felt colder. I shot the infrared, thermometer at it, and it registered as 3 degrees cooler, but the sand he was standing on was wet, so I don't know if that could have thrown off the reading. The activity started to die down after that, and the flag stopped moving. After the activity died off, we went to go check out the rest of the cemetery. As we walked away, I faintly smelled whiskey. It's a smell I always recognize because I hate whiskey. Almost right after that, my EMF meter spiked up into the orange. At first I thought it was a fluke or that I was standing over something metal, so I walked 5 to 6 feet back. The activity died off for about 6 to 7 seconds and started again, spiking back up into the orange. I called the guys over, and they thought it was pretty significant. Brandon switched meters with me to see if it was just a malfunction, but every meter I held gave off the same reading. Brandon got close to see if he could get his meter to go off too. He managed to get his to make the same reading, but only for a couple seconds. The readings died off completely almost as soon as he got right next to me, like shoulder to shoulder close. When we backed up, the readings spiked back to orange. Whatever it was would only show up for me. You have no idea how exciting this was. It would fade out every now and then, but only for about 2 to 3 seconds, and then it would come back again. Keep in mind these were areas I had already walked around with the meter and had had no activity. It was getting late, and we needed to see the rest of the yard, so we started off for the other side. I invited whatever it was, I called it Peter since the activity started after we visited his grave, to follow me around the cemetery while we worked. Sure enough, everywhere I went, I had a reading and occasionally smelled whiskey again. There was always a slight pause between stopping and getting a reading, like whatever it was a lot slower than me. We eventually made it back to the girl's grave to collect the camera we had left there. As they went to pack up the camera, I looked down and noticed that my meter was topped out in the red, as high as the thing could go. I flagged Chad down, and he turned the camera to me and said there was some kind of mist around me. I didn't see anything around me, but sure enough, on the camera, there are 2 to 3 frames where I'm surrounded by some kind of fog/mist thing. Right after that, my EMF meter dropped to 0, and I didn't get any activity for the rest of the night. We soon packed up and headed home to check over the footage. Whispers and the wind in an abandoned graveyard. I practice black magic, so I keep venturing into unknown isolated territories to find the perfect spot for my rituals, and I keep getting weird and creepy experiences at new locations. I have grown accustomed to such experiences after more than a decade of doing this. But once in a while, the experience is so intense and the air feels so thick that it sends a chill down my spine. During the new moon solar eclipse on Sunday, 21 of September, I set out to do a ritual to invoke a strong shadow being for the first time. The location was an abandoned graveyard 3 hours drive from where I live. I had to park my car behind it and had to walk for 20 to 25 minutes into the forest. As I got closer to the graveyard, it felt like there was someone walking beside me, like I could feel their presence. As the moon was the most suitable day for the black magic, I knew that negative energies would be at peak power, and the behavior of any existing being would be disturbing. I ignored whatever was happening. I picked a spot for my ritual and started cleaning it. Once I cleaned the place, I turned back to unpack my things, and I felt the wind, and the spot was filled with leaves and dirt again. I cleaned it once again, and the wind blew once again for the next 5 seconds and stopped. The spot was messy again, but this time I noticed that it was exactly like I found it when I arrived there. I started hearing whispers that I couldn't understand. I resolved to leave the spot undisturbed, so I altered the location and performed the ritual. I could hear the whispers until the middle of the ritual, and then it stopped. I finished that ritual and left the place without turning back. Something tried luring me into the ruins. When I was a kid, I grew up going back and forth from England and Ireland due to having family in both countries. No matter which country I was living in at the time, one thing that never changed was being taken on some family trip to see a castle. In fact, I've seen so many castles during my childhood, I can't even count them all. Most of the castles I saw in England were with my grandparents, but by the time I was once again living in Ireland, these castle trips with them had been substituted for castle hunting with my dad, as he liked to call it. I didn't really like these castle hunting trips with my dad, mostly because the castles we went to were very small and unimpressive, compared to the grand and well-preserved ones I saw in England. In fact, the castles we went to in Ireland weren't even castles, they were more like fortified houses from the 16th century. There are some terrific castles in Ireland, but the only problem with Irish castles like these is they're either privately owned or completely swarmed with tourists, so my dad much preferred to find the lesser-known ones in the country. Searching the web for one of these lesser-known castles, my dad would then find one that was near the border between the provinces of Leinster and Munster. Although I can't remember which county or even province this castle was in, it was probably somewhere in Tipperary. After an hour of driving to find this castle, we then came upon a small cow or sheep field in the middle of nowhere. The reason we stopped outside this field was because the castle we were looking for just happened to be inside it. Unlike the other castles we'd already seen, this one was definitely not a fortified house. The ruins were fairly tall with 2 out of 4 remaining round towers. Clearly no effort had been made to preserve this castle, as it was entirely covered in vegetation, but for a castle in Ireland, it was very much worth the trip. Entering the field to explore the castle, one of the first things I see is an entrance into a very dark room, or perhaps chamber. Although I was curious as to what was inside there, the entrance was extremely dark, so dark that all I could see was black. I've always been afraid of going into very dark places, but for some reason, despite how terrified the thought of entering this room was, I also felt a strong, unfamiliar urge to go through the darkness, as though something was trying to lure me in there. As curious as I was to enter this pitch-black entrance, I was also just as afraid. It was as though my determined curiosity and fear of the dark were equal to each other in this moment, whereas in the past, my fear of the darkness was always much stronger. Torn between my curiosity to enter the darkness and my fear of it, I eventually move on to explore the rest of the castle ruins, where I would again come upon another entrance. Unlike the first entrance, this one was not as dark. Therefore, I could see this entrance was in fact a tunnel of sorts, and just like the first, I again felt a strong urge to go inside. Swallowing my fear, which was a rare occurrence for me, I worked up the courage to enter the tunnel, without my phone or a flashlight on hand, before reaching where the light ended and the darkness began. Now facing the darkness of this tunnel, I felt an incredibly strong urge, as if something were truly trying to lure me in. But as strong as this lure and my own curiosity were, thankfully my fear of dark places won out, and so I exited the tunnel to go find my dad on the outside. Telling my dad about this tunnel I found, he then enters with his flashlight to look around. Although I was safely outside, I could see my dad waving his flashlight through the darkness. My dad comes out and returns to me instead of exploring further down the tunnel, as I had expected him to do. When I asked him why he didn't explore further down the tunnel, he said right where the darkness of the tunnel begins, there is a deep hole with jagged rocks and bricks at the bottom. This revelation was quite jarring to me, because when I entered that tunnel only a few minutes ago, I was not only incredibly close to where this hole was, but I very nearly let this lure bring me into the darkness, where I most certainly would have fallen into the hole. After exploring the castle ruins for a few more minutes, we then head back to the car to drive home. While driving back, I asked my dad if he explored the first entrance that I nearly went into. I should mention that my dad is ex-military, and I've never really known him to be scared of anything, but when I asked him if he explored that dark room, to my surprise, he said he was too afraid to go in there, even with a flashlight. This is the same man who free climbs our roof just to paint the chimney. Like I have said already, I've explored many castles in the UK and Ireland, and despite many of them having dark, eerie rooms, this particular castle seemed to draw me in and petrify me in a way no castle has ever done before. It definitely felt as though something was trying to lure me into those dark entrances, and if that was the case, then was it intentionally trying to make me fall down the hole? That's a question I've asked myself many times. But who knows, maybe it was absolutely nothing. Before I end things here, there is something I need to bring up. I made an effort to find the name and location of this specific castle for the purposes of this. Searching different websites for the lesser-known castles in Ireland, the castles I found didn't match this one in appearance. I did recently ask my dad about the name and location of this castle, but because it was some years ago, he unfortunately couldn't remember. He may have taken pictures of this castle at the time, and so when he gets around to it, he's going to try and find them in his computer files. So, what do you think? Did something really try luring me into those ruins? And if so, was its intention to make me fall down the jagged hole? Or is all this just silly superstition on my part? That's easily what it could have been. If you want, be sure to leave your own creepy castle experiences in the comments, and if anyone thinks they know what castle in Ireland this was, that would be great. I explored a tunnel under Fort Paul. I had no idea it was haunted. I grew up in many places during my childhood, but the place I lived for the most years was in the East Riding of Yorkshire. During the 9 years that I lived there, I had only one haunting, and potentially paranormal, experience that I can speak of. And it happened in a place called Fort Paul. Located along the Humber estuary, just outside the city of Hull, Fort Paul is a former gun battery turned museum. The fort was originally commissioned by King Henry VIII in the 16th century and has had a long military history, ranging from the English Civil War to both World Wars. However, despite the long history behind it, Fort Paul is now contemporarily known for being a very unsettling and haunted place. I first visited Fort Paul with my family when I was around 13 years old. I have always had a strong interest in history, and I was therefore quite eager to visit for the first time. However, it was definitely not what I had expected. The fort seemed very run down, and the attractions were old and beginning to decay, especially the wax mannequins in historical clothing. I do recall a member of staff saying the museum was struggling to get by due to insufficient funding. Exploring around the old military bunkers of the fort, I had now run ahead of my family, who were taking too long to look at the attractions, when I suddenly came upon the entrance to an underground tunnel. Entering down the steps, I find the white, round walls of the tunnel very claustrophobic, and every step I take is followed by a loud, undisturbed echo. As visually unsettling as I found this tunnel, the most eerie thing about it was that, with every echoing step I took, I felt as though there was another presence down here with me. So much so, I was terrified to reach the other side of the tunnel, as though if I did, something or someone would grab me. I did eventually reach the other end of the tunnel, but that was only when another visitor, an older gentleman, had joined down there. Although I now felt brave enough to wander down the tunnel with this other visitor, the unknown presence I felt the first time was still all around me. Well, once I reached the tunnel's end, where there was a display of artifacts from the Tudor/Elizabethan period, I then quickly and fearfully made my way out of the tunnel and back to the surface. Before writing this experience of mine, I did some homework on Fort Paul, just to learn if any other visitors had similar experiences. Little did I know, but the fort apparently has a long reputation for being haunted and has been investigated by many paranormal groups and ghost hunters and was even featured in paranormal TV shows. There are several chilling ghost stories that have appeared from Fort Paul, from the ghost of an RAF airman who haunts one of the aircraft to the fort's old railway carriage, where others also claim to have seen a woman in Victorian-era clothing. Perhaps the most unnerving ghost story from Fort Paul involves the spirit of a soldier. According to this story, there was once a soldier stationed at the fort who, after committing an offense, was kept in one of the underground holding cells. According to investigators as well as staff workers, people have reported hearing the sound of heavy boots within the corridors. Some claim to have seen the shadowy figure of the soldier himself, to even capture recordings of his faint voice saying the words "get out and leave." Regarding the underground tunnel where I had my experience, people also claim to have felt an oppressive feeling while down there. They heard voices, saw shadows, and even felt invisible hands grab at them. I can't say whether these other alleged experiences or stories from Fort Paul are true, but all I know is when I went down that tunnel, I definitely felt as though I wasn't alone. I think I might have had an encounter with a spirit in an abandoned factory. I was exploring an old factory in an area in Manchester, England, today with my friends, one of the largest abandoned places I've ever seen. When we were about an hour and 15 minutes into our exploration, things began to change significantly. We were on the second floor with a third floor above us, which was not accessible to us. When from the third floor we heard someone walking from the other side towards us, this place was completely empty, no graffiti, no homeless people, just us three. We all stayed silent and didn't make a sound as we heard the footsteps continue above us. At this point we had all decided to leave and started to make our way towards the exit, with my friends in front and me lagging behind, looking for an easier way out. As I was walking, the ground behind me started to be walked on very hard and very quickly, and I turned around half expecting a homeless man to be behind me, but there was nothing, no person nor sound to be seen in the vicinity, meaning I was either going crazy or there was something behind me. It was evident on my face that I was panicked as I looked around frantically trying to figure out what was going on, and even one of my friends noticed and asked if I was okay, and at that second we heard at least 5 glass panels all break in sync behind us, and so we started to sprint out as quick as we could as we realized we were unwanted, and as we got to the exit, our friend suggested looking at the final building, and almost comedically as he said it, we heard a gate swing open slowly, letting out an eerie sound that broke the silence, and we soon got out of there. This was a rather scary experience for us all, as we see it as our first encounter with what seemed to be a supernatural entity. Even my friend who doesn't believe in the paranormal had no explanation for the footsteps or the gate. I just want to know, were any of us close to something happening? Side note, the day was relatively warm, yet when we entered the engine room on the second floor, it was freezing compared to downstairs and upstairs. We were able to see our breath, even our fingers began feeling the effects of the cold. We also found DVDs on the floor with names such as Harvey Experiment and Liquid People. As far as we were concerned, this place didn't have a terrible history except for a fire that broke out a few years earlier. Another side note, we explored most of the building, and the events didn't occur till we reached the second floor. Is this something normal? Additionally, the footsteps above us couldn't have been a person, as the floor again was unreachable via ladder or stairs, which meant it would be impossible to reach. If anyone has any explanation as to why this happened or if this is normal in this type of world, please let me know. Also, my sister has a suspicion that if I had not turned around in time, then I would have been in serious danger. My brother and I both have a distinct memory of stumbling across a facility in the woods. My brother is 7 years older than me, so when I was 9 to 10, he was in high school and had to hide from our parents that he smoked and dipped tobacco. As a result, most days of the week after he got home from school, I was homeschooled, we'd go out in the woods for an hour or two. We lived way out in the country in an already rural part of East Texas, so there were plenty of woods to explore. The land south of our house was all owned by a mining company, and my parents didn't want us going out there, so we always crossed a fence to the north of our house and explored the woods out there. Living out in the country, we figured that we would see plenty of signs before accidentally walking into someone's backyard, even though we were likely trespassing on some local's property. After a few months of venturing out in this area, never traveling more than an hour's distance from our house and always in the daylight, we decided one day we'd just keep walking. And walking. My brother smoked and spit into a Dr. Pepper bottle. We entered big pastures and dove back into even deeper woods. Whenever we've talked about it, we've always said that we must have traveled at least a mile, but we usually say far more. Eventually, we came across a circular pond I distinctly remember having a much higher rim on one side. My brother explained that this was because a tractor had dug it out and piled up more dirt on one side than the others. We kept going past the pond and entered another patch of woods. As we came out, we saw that the tree line curved around sharply to the right, and the clearing we now stood in opened up far wider. We went in that direction, and while my memory of getting there is a little hazy, I know we suddenly came across a very large white building surrounded by a high fence. There was a gate large enough for vehicles to move in and out and a dirt road leading away from the facility. We could hear the sounds of activity and see people walking around outside the fence, near the gate. I'm afraid any other detail I could give at this point might be colored by false memory or exaggerations from an imaginative young brain, so I'll wait to talk to my brother about it more before I go any further. At that moment, we both felt the spine-tingling terror alerting the body that something about this was very wrong. We were not supposed to be here. We were at the very least going to get into serious trouble. We were standing in the middle of a clearing gawking at a facility of some kind on what was obviously someone else's property, and we were seeing something deep out in the woods that we had never known was here. All this time we'd spent walking around these woods, if we'd just gone a ways further, we would have stumbled across this. I remember standing there for a moment longer, asking my brother what this could possibly be. He responded with something like, "I have no idea, but we should definitely leave this place." The tone of his voice genuinely terrified me, and I vividly recall sprinting back the way we came, crossing the same pond, and following a path as closely as possible to our original route. When we finally stopped, out of breath, my brother told me that in no way, shape, or form, would I utter a word of this to our parents. They were strict disciplinarians, and he was well aware of the consequences he would face for exposing his younger brother to what could have been a dangerous situation. After that day, we kept going out in those woods, but never that far. Eventually, my brother got caught with a can of Skull, and my dad made him eat the whole can and puke it up on the porch. Being an easily intimidated little kid, it wasn't hard to get more information out of me about my brother's smoking and dipping habits, but I never brought up the facility we'd found. Over the years, my brother and I have brought this story up many times. Our parents have gotten way laxer since we've all grown up, and we've even told them the story, to my mother's retroactive shock. We've added a lot of other weird ones to our arsenal in the time since, as our family has always lived by huge areas of land for us to wander around on, but this is one of our favorites. It's always, remember the time we almost got ended by those government researchers? Recall the occasion when we discovered that unusual building in the woods, with individuals walking around it? But for the past few days, this event has been really bugging me. I told my wife about it in detail, and she was pretty amused. I thought I'd look around in Google Maps a little bit at the area we grew up in, something I'm honestly surprised I've never done for these specific reasons before. And what I've found, or haven't found, is really bizarre. On maps, I can very clearly make out the woods where we spent most of our time as I moved north from my old house, which has since burned down and left an ugly scar on the satellite image. When I go further north, I can see several large clearings followed by more wooded areas. I found the circular pond, and I'm sure I can see the higher end where my brother explained how it was made. When I drag the map further, I see what looks to be the clearing and the sharp curve of the tree line to where we saw the facility, but there's nothing there. No trace of a building, no evidence of a dirt road leading away from an old structure. It's just pasture and more trees. When I zoom out and look at the whole area, it doesn't seem possible for there to have been an operation of the scale we saw there. Just a little ways further north, the land becomes nothing but pasture with houses pressed up against a county road. For people to have come and gone from this area, they would have had a road of some kind, as well as power lines, stretched out to the building. But there's nothing like that on Google. In fact, there's really no here it was. Spot on the map. It's like it was never there to begin with. It's been a few years since we've talked about it, so I texted my brother earlier today to ask him if he still remembered this happening. He called me immediately after and said, "Hell yeah, man, that was a really weird day. You know how good I used to be in the woods, but that shit really freaked me out. We had to get out of there." This entire event increasingly feels like a situation we stumbled into that we were never meant to witness. I still remember the feeling of dread upon finding the place and knowing that something bad would happen if we stuck around. I'm going to try and send him this later so he can read it and corroborate, as well as look at maps for himself to see if he sees anything different. I explored the abandoned St. Catherine's Academy last night with my friends, and I still can't explain why. I understand that this may sound unbelievable, but I feel compelled to share my experience from last night, as I truly don't comprehend what we went through. For context, I'm 19M, I live near the India-Nepal border and spend most of my time in Nepal. I dropped out to prepare for entrance exams, and honestly, I've just been at home most of the time. My sleep schedule is completely messed up, and I spend most nights just scrolling through my phone or watching videos. Last night, around 1 a.m., I was feeling extremely bored and decided to text my friends Oftab and Mohit, both 20M, to see if they wanted to hang out. Oftab suggested we check out this old abandoned Catholic school called St. Catherine's Academy that he'd heard about. It closed down in 2019. It was a boarding school that had been running since the 1950s, but enrollment dropped and they shut it down. Ever since, the building has remained vacant, and rumors about its haunting have persisted. None of us really believe in ghosts. But we were bored, couldn't sleep, and honestly just wanted to do something different. We looked it up on Google Maps and realized it was only like 20 minutes away, so around 2 a.m. we piled into Mohit's car and headed out. The property is huge. There's the main academic building, a chapel, and old dormitories all connected by covered walkways. The fence has a gap near the back where it looks like people have gotten in before. We parked on a side road and walked up with just our phone flashlights. Right away the vibe was off. It was dead silent. No sounds at all. Just this heavy stillness that felt wrong. Mohit joked about it being creepy, but you could tell he was a little on edge too. The main doors were chained, but one of the ground floor windows was smashed, so we climbed through into what looked like an old classroom. Desks are still stacked up, a faded crucifix is on the wall, and the chalkboard has some writing still barely visible. We walked down the main hallway, and it was standard creepy abandoned building stuff, peeling paint, water damage, and broken ceiling tiles. Oftab was recording on his phone, and Mohit kept making jokes to lighten the mood. Honestly, we were getting more comfortable because it just felt like an empty building. We went upstairs and found old offices, the library with empty shelves, and a teacher's lounge. Then we found the chapel. This long corridor connects the chapel to the main building, and the door was slightly ajar. The chapel is small, maybe it fits 100 people. The pews were still there, and there was an altar at the front with this life-size crucifix hanging above it. Stained glass windows on both sides, though some were broken. This is where things got weird. We walked down the center all taking pictures. About halfway down, all three of us stopped at the same time. Mohit said it first, "Yo, does anyone else feel like we should leave?" Oftab and I both felt it too. Not like a spooky feeling, but genuine panic. My chest got tight, I felt sick, and I had this certainty that we were not supposed to be there. The fact that all three of us felt it at the same time freaked us out. We turned around to leave, and that's when we heard it, a child laughing. Not creepy, but genuine giggling like a little girl playing. It came from the front left corner near the altar. All three of us heard it. Oftab went, "What the F was that?" And we just stood there frozen. The sound stopped immediately. Total silence. We stood there for like 30 seconds, and then we heard it again, but this time it sounded like it was coming from behind us near the entrance. Mohit said, "Nah, bro, I'm out," and started walking toward the door. That's when we heard footsteps above us. The chapel has a second-floor balcony where the choir used to sit. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. We could all hear the floorboards creaking. We didn't say anything, we just booked it out of there. Like straight up ran. But here's the part that really messed us up. As we were leaving through the corridor back to the main building, Oftab stopped at a bulletin board on the wall with old papers pinned to it. Most were too faded, but one was a newspaper clipping from 2003. He took a picture of it. The headline said St. Catherine's student dies in tragic accident. It was about a 9-year-old girl named Arushi who fell from the choir balcony in the chapel during rehearsal and died. They said it was an accident, but the article mentioned concerns raised by parents before it happened. We didn't even talk on the drive home. We were all just quiet, processing what happened. The footsteps were on that exact balcony. The laughing sounded like a young girl. And that feeling in the chapel, all three of us felt it at the exact same time without saying anything first. I'm sitting at home now at 4 a.m., and I can't stop thinking about this. Aftab and Mohit are in our group chat saying the same thing. We want there to be a rational explanation. Maybe the laughing was an animal, maybe the footsteps were the building settling, maybe we all just psyched each other out. But the timing, all three of us feeling it simultaneously, and then finding that article? I don't know, man. None of us want to go back. Chillingham Castle. This was my first ever paranormal investigation. It was October last year, and my two friends, we'll call them Sarah and Cameron just to respect the privacy of their real names, thought it would be a good idea to go ghost hunting for the first time. So we booked a guided ghost hunting session at Chillingham Castle. Eventually the day came when we'd go to Chillingham Castle, and Sarah decided to buy a spirit board, thick as mints for doing that, before we went, and we used it in Cameron's room. They were dating, by the way. Cameron stayed out of it, fair enough, but Sarah and I, like the stupid idiots we were, decided to use it. So we connect, no idea if she was screwing around, but yeek, to a few spirits. But the main one we connected to was a spirit named Lyron. Now here's where it gets strange. We talked to Lyron for a bit, and he tells us he's a demon. Like I said, I'm not believing it, and I look up Lyron, and nothing comes up. Anyways, we're done with the spirit board. Now, we made our way to Chillingham Castle around 10 p.m., and I genuinely thought we were going to die because of Cameron's driving. Now, this was a guided ghost hunt, so there were us and about 15 other people there. Anyways, the guide comes in, explains the equipment, and explains the spirits that roam the castle, and then we go into our first investigation. Since the actual basement was shut off, because they said it was very unsafe for guests, they remade the basement just in a separate room on the ground level. We head into that room, where we are given rods. I must admit that I was shaking, and so were the others. This was our first ever ghost hunt. All three of us were positioned at the end of the room closest to the entrance. The guide turns off the lights and asks questions, and the rods begin to move. But the scariest part of this first investigation was that I kept looking at the door, as if someone were standing right next to me the entire time. But after I kept looking at the door, I kept hearing voices closer to the door, and I wasn't the only one hearing them, Sarah was as well. We were both freaked out that we had made it through. Also, Cameron and I got pushed on command, funnily enough, and no, it wasn't the guide or anything else, we can still just about see everyone in the darkness, and no one was in front of us when we were pushed, so that was cool. Although it initially freaked me out, I ultimately found it cool. Anyways, on to the second investigation. In the second investigation, the three of us were in the room first, not last, like the first room. We were in King James I's room, I believe. Anyways, we walk in, and there's a table with 6 chairs, a random statue, and a room round the back. Now I'm looking away at this part, but I get nudged by Cameron, asking if I just saw what he saw, and I'm like, no, because I was looking away, but both he and Sarah saw a hand move away from the statue. Now I was turned away, so I can neither confirm nor deny if this was real, but they were freaking out about it. Anyways, on to the investigation. So in this one, we were using the spirit box, the Estes method, to be exact, and the music box. Now, for the first 5 to 10 minutes, everything was fine. We were getting normal responses to our questions. Then, when Sarah received the spirit box back, since the 6 of us were sitting at the table, taking turns using the Estes method, she immediately said, "Clear as day, demon." Not even 10 seconds into getting the box back, she said, "Clear as day, demon." Now there is a malevolent spirit called Tim or Timothy, but the guide said he's usually on the 2nd floor, not the top of the castle. So I looked at Cameron when the guide said this, and I said, "Lyron's followed us, didn't he?" Eek, as a joke. As soon as I said this, the back room made a huge bang sound, and I thought I felt some poo come out. Don't worry, I didn't actually crap myself, but I jumped. I guess that sort of confirmed that we just accidentally summoned a mad ghost. Fun. But there is an open top roof with a balcony above us, and I keep looking up because I think someone is watching us from above. Anyways, a few minutes go by, and I look to my left towards the door, and I see a shadow, clear as day, right in front of my eyes. I could tell that the figure was a woman wearing a dress. She likely walked about 5 feet in front of me. The guide saw it as well, and it wasn't him. He sat behind me, probably about 7 or 8 feet away, and I would have heard him move, because he was sitting on a box that made noise whenever he moved, and it didn't. Anyways, after seeing that, my mind was generally blown. But another few minutes go by, and I get touched. Not touched, as in, like, a hand on my shoulder or something like that. But I got poked 5 times in my lower back, just above where my bum is, and I turned around. Again, it's not the guide, and I turned around so quick that if it were the guide, I would see him move back, but he's just chilling, and it's not Cameron. He sat right next to me, because his arms were on the table the entire time. So this freaked me out, but nothing happened after that, so after about another 10 minutes, we leave. The final investigation took place in the chapel, which also has a back room that is believed to be inhabited by Tim or Timothy, the malevolent or demonic spirit. I will briefly skip over the final investigation because I found it somewhat boring. But I will say this. While we were all relaxing in the chapel during the investigation, which I can't quite remember the method of, we asked if Tim was present, and about 2 seconds later, a loud bang came from the back room of the chapel. It didn't sound like something hitting the wall, it sounded as if an object had been thrown, suggesting that if it was Tim, he had thrown something at the wall, and the noise was so loud that it echoed throughout the castle. Anyways, like I said, it was boring for the most part, so we'll skip it. But yeah, that was the story of my first investigation ever. If anyone has any recommendations on any haunted places I should go next, please let me know and I'll look into it. I entered the attic. Something had entered my house. My family and I moved into a new house in December of 2015. We had no issues until we decided to open up the attic door and look around up there in mid to late September of 2018. Flash forward to October 10th of the same year, a few weeks after we entered the attic and found nothing. I settled down with my dogs to go to sleep at a relatively early time, 9:30 or 10, maybe, but that doesn't matter. I get to sleep with both of my dogs on me to get woken up by some knocks on my room door. Now, my room door doesn't latch, and it never has since we moved in. You come into my room from the hallway, and you can just push the door to get in, you don't have to turn the handle. Back to the night. I forgot to look at the time, but in the dead of night there were a series of knocks on my door that woke me and my dogs up. The crazy thing is my door didn't swing open, meaning the knocks were coming from inside my room. I wasn't as scared as I probably should have been, so I moved both of my barking dogs off of me and ran into the hallway, then out into my dining room, which is connected to the kitchen and living room and has a clear view of both my front and back doors. I was making sure no one broke in. Of course, they hadn't. I walk back to my room, calm my dogs down, and get back to sleep. Not 20 minutes later, a loud thud wakes me up again, but by that time, I am too tired to investigate. When I get up in the morning, I realize it was a hanging calendar that fell. Nothing happens the first half of the day. I told my family about the incident, and they confirmed that while they heard me get up, they did not hear any knocking or the sound of a falling calendar, which is surprising because my sister's room is directly across the hallway from mine. Life goes on as normal until we eat supper and sit at the table to play some board games. We were in the middle of dinosaur-themed Monopoly. My nephew loves dinosaurs, when my 2 dogs started barking at a corner with a bookshelf in it. Now, as cliché as it is, there was nothing there. We even stood in the corner and waved our hands around to show our barking and growling dogs that there was no one there. My niece and nephew were scared and on the verge of tears after a night of strange events, and it took some hands-on attention to calm the dogs. Besides our dogs barking at nothing, another weird fact is that one of the walls making up the corner they saw something in was shared with my room where the knocking happened earlier that morning. And then it stopped. The night of October 10th and the day of October 11th in 2018 are the only times I ever had scary stuff happen to my family and me. There were no boxes or belongings from previous owners in our attic, but I truly believe that our activities up there awakened something that terrified our family once before moving on to wherever it desired, leaving us undisturbed for the next 2 years and hopefully longer. I've never mentioned this to anyone besides my close family, and we've all wordlessly agreed to not talk much about it in fear of it happening again. Of course, I wasn't done. I bought a Ouija board that December and talked my mom into trying it with me. My sister is scared of them, so she never learned about it. One December night at around 11, when everyone was asleep, my mom and I sat down and started using the Ouija board. Over the course of half an hour, we spoke with someone named Tamra who was born in '51 and who claimed to have died by a gun. I did a tad bit of research the following day and found an obituary for a Tamra May Q. She was born in a neighboring town in, you guessed it, 1951. She passed in 2014 from some form of cancer, bless her soul, but there was no mention of a gun in the obituary. The coincidence of matching name and date of birth was enough to tell me that whatever happened the night of October 10, 2018, might have been the doing of Tamra. I just wish I knew what she wanted and why she wanted us to know she was there. Was she a friend of the previous owner, who passed in 2017? Was she angry when she pounded on my door and knocked down my calendar? Will she come back? I'll never know. This experience made me so interested in ghosts that I've been saving up money to make a trip to a local real haunted house. I'm taking the Ouija board I talked to Tamra about, as well as a few odds and ends for ghost hunting tools. Feel free to ask questions about anything mentioned. If I can write it off as a coincidence, I gladly will. A bad time to explore. I'm a person who doesn't hang around groups of friends, so that means I am usually around a single friend at any given time. My name is not relevant, but I will say that I am 16 and this incident happened to me a few years ago. My then best friend and I would often engage in various adventurous activities, regardless of how foolish they might seem at the time. Being teenage guys, neither of us wanted to show any fear. We lived near a small bayou, and sometimes we would ride our bikes alongside it or explore some drainage areas. Of the two of us, I was the more sensible one, meaning I knew better than to go certain places or hang around the kinds of people he eventually got involved with, the reason we are no longer friends. One day we were bored and thought about the skate park that was being demolished so a new neighborhood could be constructed. He told me about a factory, I'm not sure what it was, but it looked like a boat repair place, that had been closed because of a fire and was less than a 1/4 mile away from us. This is getting long already, so I'm just going to cut to the chase the best I can. We ended up going around the side of the compound that borders a bayou and through the back wall. The outside was kind of in a dilapidated state, but it looked relatively clean. In the courtyard, there was a front fence and gate made of sheet metal, so no one could see us. On our right, we noticed a low-lying building. It looked like a barn for horses, but it was made out of sheet metal and housed boats with a roof that looked like a bomb had fallen through it. There was also a main building that was 1 story but looked like a giant hangar. It was 30+ feet tall and had most of the rusty, scorched, sheet metal walls blown or stripped off of the frame. Inside, there was a large open floor space that opened to the center of the compound. There was also an office area with a single hallway and a door that led out of the hangar and another door that went out front on the opposite end. This second door was locked. We tried to open it and even kicked it, but it was solidly shut. We goofed around in the large open area for a bit, then decided to go into the office area. Here's where it gets scary. In the office area there is a single straight hallway with a bathroom on the opposite side of the hallway across from the entrance door to the large space. There were 3 other rooms, with 2 on the bathroom side and a single larger one on the side with the hangar door, which was near the front exit that was on the opposite end of the hall. We went from room to room looking around and even spent at least a good 10 minutes looking through the larger room. After having our fill of exploration, we decided to head back to the hangar entrance door and stopped by the bathroom to crack some toilet jokes. As I'm standing in the doorway of the bathroom, I get a slow burning feeling in the pit of my stomach, and then suddenly I hear heavy footsteps to my left, almost stomping. I turn to look down the hall, only to hear a sharp crack and see the locked door halfway closed on the opposite end of the hall. I thought that I saw a glimpse of something slipping through that door and moving away. I told my friend, and we swiftly start towards that end of the hall. We looked in the large room that was right next to the door that just opened. As we looked around, we started to smell something pungent and burning. We also felt a gentle heat, but it was dark and we saw no embers or flame. When we checked the room earlier, we saw signs of people, but nobody was actually there, and there was no active fire. We were pretty spooked and quickly exited through the door that the thing had just gone through. We were now on the street and didn't see anybody around but the few cars that were driving past on the road. The wind and silent rumble of the road make us realize that any calls for help would have been in vain. The time of me hearing/seeing the thing and us leaving was no more than a minute. We went home and haven't been in that area since. What makes it scary in my mind is the fact that a fire happened some time before, yet we still smelled burning. Furthermore, that door was locked. We even tried opening it once we got inside. On top of all that, the fact that whoever or whatever it was could have hurt us or worse freaks me out, because nobody would have a clue as to what happened to us. Camping on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, the vibe wasn't always bad, but it was almost always very, very odd. I have camped there numerous times and hold a deep affection for it, but it can be quite unsettling. Beyond just general vibes, the only time I really experienced something was when my buddy and I were camping way out on the beach. This was years ago and was in the late fall if I remember correctly. It was just us in the pitch dark, sitting in the sand around the fire. Girlfriends were warm at home. There was light rain, thick fog, and waves so close you could feel them. and there was no one else around for likely a good few miles, but we were so fogged in and the waves were so loud that even if we were surrounded by people, we still would have been alone. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden my buddy was getting my attention, shaking me or clapping or something. Upon noticing that our fire had burned low and the ring of heat-dried sand had shrunk to the extent where I was now sitting in the cold drizzle, all I could say to him was, "Where did everybody go?" To which he, of course, replied, "There is nobody else here." I'm not sure how much time had passed, but in the time we had been sitting around the fire, I had lapsed into a state that I can only clumsily describe as feeling like contentedly sitting in a comfy chair alone in a warm room while all your friends and family wander by behind you and socialize in another room just far enough away that you can't tell what they are saying but close enough that you know they are there, can hear their laughter, and can hear the clinks of their glasses. I'm not saying that I thought my actual friends and family were around, but it was kind of that feeling, glimpses of movement, flashes of color, murmuring, and the overwhelming feeling of being surrounded by people whom you know and trust. While this was all going on around me, there was a small, dark tan, and wrinkled woman or female-appearing entity or something sitting on the driftwood logs on the opposite side of the fire, a little behind and to the side of my buddy. It sounds goofy, but she was very similar to Yoda in size and attire, though a little bigger, sun/salt weathered, and for sure wearing some type of loose organic material clothing. She was not lurking, stalking, leering, looming, or otherwise being creepy, just sitting a little back from our fire and looking at me. At the time, this seemed like the most normal thing in the world, so I did not remark upon her presence or the fact that I was feeling like there was a party going on around us that I couldn't quite see. Upon snapping out of it, in addition to the initial confusion of going from the warm outskirts of a boisterous gathering back to the cold, wet, and dark sand of a Pacific Northwest beach, I felt immense loss and loneliness at the disappearance of the entity and the unidentified friends who had been surrounding me moments before. This experience, while maybe nothing real, is one of my most cherished memories. It brought tears to my eyes and caused my legs to tense up just writing about it. I'm not sure if anyone will read this far down, but if you do, let me get ahead of some potential questions. Drugs? No, we had consumed a small amount of alcohol, but it was no more than what would be considered safe in the woods. Although I was not experienced with drugs at the time, the general lights, colors, noises, and warm feeling of well-being resembled the effects of medium-low mushroom doses that I was fortunate to experience years later. Spiritual? It was not spiritual or focused on the supernatural or aliens, it simply reflected the healthy curiosity that anyone with a beating heart should have about the world. History of experiences/encounters? No, nothing before and nothing similar since. The day I stumbled across an abandoned asylum. This is a completely true story about an event that occurred when I was around 16 years old, which still scares me to this day, even though I am now 22. So I live in Canada in one of the bigger cities in the country, and we have a fair amount of national parks inside city limits that are filled with sprawling forests and rock faces and just nature, sometimes super dense and very hard to traverse if you go off the beaten path. I'm an avid hiker who participated in Boy Scouts during my childhood and teenage years, which has given me extensive experience in hiking and exploring. Almost all of my childhood was spent exploring. My friend Jay, not his actual name, has a massive fascination with cartography, the profession of making maps, and has some experience hiking and exploring. Jay and I become excited about exploring the untouched areas of one of the national parks, which slightly overlaps with another park in the city. So considering that a pretty decent amount of this in-city park has legitimately unexplored parts, we thought we might find something interesting or discover something no one else has ever found. Well, we're hiking in a semi-mapped part of the park, and when I say semi, a lot of it's guesswork because no one has really taken the time to explore this part at all for some odd reason. We find a few creeks here and there. Jay is marking things we find on the map in this unmapped area so we know what it looks like. So we're hiking, and we find a slight clearing that turns out to be an old dirt road, which probably hasn't been used in 70 to 80 years. So we get the bright idea to follow the road for a while to see where it heads. Curiosity is really not the best. So we've been following the road for about 2 hours or so, give or take about 10 minutes, and we come across this sign. This sign was about as old as the road and has been there for years. The paint is completely gone, but it's still legible. The sign reads Sunny Acres Asylum, name changed so you guys don't go looking for this. We both look at each other in shock because even on the guesswork map that we have, this area wasn't even marked at all. So we continue down the road for roughly 10 minutes or so, and then we come across this absolutely massive asylum. The building kind of makes a big U or a C. If you find places like this, you tend to see them absolutely littered with graffiti, broken windows, and kind of trashed in disarray. That was not the case here. This place had absolutely no graffiti or vandalism of any type that we could see like at all. The place appeared pristine overall, despite being old and a little run down. We entered the building, foolishly disregarding our safety. We explore for a while, nothing really interesting happens. I all of a sudden get this really uneasy gut feeling like something is off. I feel a smidge paranoid, which is not at all normal for me in the slightest. I look at Jay and ask him if he feels that feeling. He says it kind of feels like we're being followed or something, but I'm not sure. But we continue on. So by this point we've explored the first floor, which is just admissions, reception, a few bathrooms with big tubs, and quite a few patient rooms. Nothing really out of the ordinary. Now we make our way upstairs to the second floor, and we immediately see a red ball down the hall just sitting there looking absolutely brand new. We think really nothing of it because it's close to a broken window, and a bird probably carried it in. So we're going through rooms, and all of a sudden I hear this whisper, kind of like someone's getting my attention. I think it's Jay, so I turn around, and he's not there. Needless to say, I was spooked. I go to about 3 rooms over, and Jay is just standing there with this really blank, expressionless look on his face. I go to touch him, and I touch his shoulder. He immediately snaps back to normal and says he must have zoned out. He zones out a lot. Anyways, we continue on. So as time goes on, we keep hearing what sounds like footsteps following us. I chalk it up to an echo because they are just slightly out of sync with mine, and I'm incredibly heavy on my feet. But this gut feeling starts to creep up, and I start to listen to the footsteps, and something is just off about them, but I can't place what. So we try to continue on as I'm intently listening to these footsteps, and it finally clicks. These footsteps are the heavy sound of boot steps. I'm wearing Converse, and so is Jay, and the footsteps we heard were very much boots with leather soles and a rubber heel. I know this sound pretty damn well because that's all my dad wore. I stop, I grab Jay, and I just look at him and whisper, "Listen." It's quiet for a few seconds, then I hear that whispering again from earlier. This time it sounds like a hushed conversation, barely audible, so I can't make anything out except for "but what should we do? Who do they think they are? And the one that scares me the most, why have they stopped?" I look at Jay, and he looks horrified, absolutely shocked. Jay's usually a pretty stoic guy, calm, and pretty good at hiding his emotions, so this was kind of surprising. We hear more muffled whispers, but we can't make anything out of them. So we start to cautiously move to the next level. We look down the hall and see the red ball just sitting a few feet away from us. We both just kind of give each other this confused look and look back. It's gone, just vanished like it was never even there. All of a sudden we hear loud footsteps and then a blood-curdling scream, sounding human but feeling so wrong. We start to run to leave, but everything goes black, and when sight kind of returns, we are in the basement, and it's about 4 hours later. We started the hike around 8 a.m., found the asylum by about 11 a.m., explored for an hour, then the event happened, and we woke up at 4 p.m. Just telling you this so you have a brief timeline. So I fumble around with packing in almost pitch black darkness to find my big flashlight so I can see what the hell is going on. I notice the air tastes kind of metallic, like it would after you've had a really bad nosebleed, and the smell is just kind of off. It doesn't smell stagnant, but it has this kind of odor you never forget but you can never explain. I look around to see if I can find Jay, but all I see are more patient rooms, a couple of gurneys, and a jacket hung up beside a patient room. So I get to my feet to get my bearings and see if I can find Jay. I check my phone to see a signal. I have some miraculously. I immediately call Jay, and he picks up and yells, "Where the duck are you, and how the duck has it been 4 hours?" He's obviously agitated and freaking out, as am I. So I explain where I am, and he explains where he is so maybe we can find each other. So I start walking forward, and I keep hearing this slight under-the-breath muttering. It sounds vaguely human, but it has this weird raspiness to it, kind of like static. I hurry up my pace because I'm freaking out. I usually keep my composure, but everything felt just super wrong. So I'm walking for about a half hour, and I find Jay sitting down with his knees against his chest and arms wrapped around his knees. I'm behind him, so he hasn't seen me yet. I touch his shoulder, and he nearly jumps out of his skin. He freaked out and yelled at me, but he seemed off, like he'd seen something, but he wouldn't say anything. He just looked at me and said, "We have to go," with such urgency and fear in his voice. So we search around and find the stairs to the first floor. We begin to climb them, but behind us we hear this scraping noise followed by a slight whine. After everything that's happened, we book it up the rest of the stairs and try to find the exit quickly. But before we could do that, we saw the red ball bouncing down the stairs to the second floor. Cliché, right? Without even looking at each other or expressing our agreement, we decided that we needed to leave immediately. We find the exit. We begin to leave. We hear this kind of guttural scream/growl that sounds angry and pained. We book it back into the forest, and I hear footsteps chasing after us accompanied by growls. We keep running until we find an actual path and pretty much keep running until we're back to civilization. We got to Jay's house, and we just collapsed. It's about 7 p.m. now. He begins just crying and looks at me and says we could have died, that thing could have ended us. I look at him and ask, "Did you see it?" And he nods but starts crying more. I ask him what it looks like. He is a bit shaky and weak, but he begins explaining what it looks like. So his description was this: a gaunt-looking man with the head of a stag and a slightly contorted body covered in dry blood. So a little background so this makes more sense. I'm a quarter native, and I've heard many stories of Wendigos, and what he describes sounds exactly like one. So fast forward a couple of weeks. I'm going for a short hike with a friend, and I keep seeing antlers behind trees behind us, following along. They are way taller than any deer could be. Throughout the day, I consistently spotted the antlers, but I chose not to mention it to my friend, who tends to be a bit timid. We continued our hike, with the antlers trailing us for approximately 3 hours. We start to head home, and as we're leaving the forest, I hear that guttural scream/growl again. Since I was 16, this thing has followed me every time I hike, and I still hike a lot, but never alone. Sometimes in the night I'll hear the distant scream/growl, which kind of feels like it's pulling me back there, but if I'm smart, I'll never go back there. Moral of the story: always hike with others and avoid unmarked abandoned buildings. The forest around my childhood home used to be my sanctuary as a kid. I'd disappear into it for hours, felt peaceful, and loved it. When I was a teenager, a boy went missing around those woods in a very unnatural way, and only his clothing was found next to the river in the winter with 2 feet of snow around. Obviously presumed deceased. I don't know what happened, but shortly after this happened, it felt like the forest got sick or something. I went to go have a walk in it one day when it was nice out, about middle to late spring, and as I was walking towards the path that would take me to it, my legs suddenly started to shake like jelly, and I felt like I was in fight or flight, but I couldn't tell why. Lots of adrenaline, extreme anxiety. I could not force myself forward, and I felt this overwhelming sense of dread kind of crushing me, so I went back home. The logical part of me thought maybe there was a predator watching me, like a bear or mountain lion, not a person, lol, since we had them in the area, but I tried again multiple times that year to go in there, and I just couldn't do it. Every time my body felt like I was having a massive panic attack. I moved out, lived elsewhere for about 2 to 3 years, came back, and wanted to go in the woods again. I got the same feeling, but it was much less, enough for me to push through and go in. Everywhere just felt bad. I don't know how to explain it besides the feeling of something not being right, that it felt sick. Every sense of comfort I had in the forest growing up was gone, and no, it wasn't because I was older and more aware of the bears and mountain lions and such that were dangerous to me there. I knew about them my entire life and had encounters with both on our property and while on a bike ride. Scary, but it wasn't at all the same. I don't believe the boy who went missing was directly responsible, but rather that the manner of his death seemed to attract something malevolent to that place. I don't know. Still don't understand it, don't know why, don't know how. Just know it sucks losing my childhood happy place to some horrifying primordial instinct of indescribable fear, lol. The summer that traumatized me. I would like to discuss this experience, as I haven't shared it with many people, in hopes of improving my mental health. I genuinely believe I have some form of PTSD as a result of this event. My friend group and I really like exploring and doing urbex. We have gone on camping trips, long hikes, and challenges where we have to follow a straight line. We enjoyed a lot of what the world had to offer, but we wanted to eventually go to buildings that were worn down and looked abandoned to experience something different. First we started off going to a worn down farmer's shed out in the middle of fields and then to places that were open during certain points of the year, and we eventually found our first big adventure. It was an old paper mill that was being partially restored, but around 85% was still untouched and was not being visited by any workers. We had run-ins with the homeless there, but it was still a fun experience due to the large expanse of the structure. Eventually we explored every nook and cranny, so we started searching for other places to explore until we found what looked to be a car scrapyard/factory. It had a central courtyard that held cars that were in various states of disarray. As we looked around, we started noticing how put together some items were, and there was a newly parked truck in the courtyard due to the absence of dust. This should have been our sign. We kept looking around until we found a strangely furnished portion of the building where it had actual walls and wood veneer coating every surface. The run-down buildings surrounding it and its exposure to the elements made it seem very out of place. In this portion of the building there were 3 doors and a short hallway connecting them, and there were dusty boots sitting in the hallway, similar to the entrance to a house. Of the 3 doors, one had a peephole, and one had a large frosted pane in it. We attempted to open the doors, and one of them opened. It was the plain door, which appeared to lead to a storage room for old chairs. The others we could not open. We then explored more and eventually left. About a month later, I revisited the location with a small group consisting of 2 other people and myself. We spent approximately an hour exploring until we came across the same strange doors. We decided to try opening them again, and this time the frosted glass door opened, and we walked in. It smelled like someone who wore strong cologne was in this room. We were talking in this room until we heard a loud bang come through the wall in the room with a peephole. We all proceeded to freeze in the doorway until the peeping door swung open. As far as we know, there are 2 ways to exit here, and both ways were in view of whoever opened that door. One was a flight of stairs and the other was a relatively long hallway. One of the people who we went with was in front of the door when it opened, and he was closest to the stairs. When that door opened, I heard a very loud thud, a click, and no noise after. The other person and I decided to hide in the room we had just opened, standing just to the left of the door. I watched as an old man holding a handgun peeked into the room and stared directly at me. I stared in silence and shook my head to plead for my life. However, he closed the door and returned to his room instead. Recognizing this opportunity, we decided to escape, and to our surprise, the room we were in had a second door in the back that we used. But we were not clear yet, as this main room was open and had a central walkway, making it impossible to visually sneak away. As we were making it for an exit, we saw the old man come out of the hallway with a shotgun. Thanks to the old construction, steps were unpredictable, and we made a lot of noise while still in sight, but he went the opposite way from us for some reason. As we eventually escaped the building, I had assumed the other person had died or been knocked out when they fell down the stairs, as there were no noises to be heard. We eventually made our way to the parking lot, where we discovered that he had also thankfully made it out. We should have kept moving because we heard a bullet pass nearby and a gunshot. It was a smaller caliber, probably a .22 LR, a type of ammunition commonly used in rifles and pistols, but we ran and drove away. This building was also in a city, so when we were at the parking lot, we were on an entirely different property. I assume he was only trying to scare us away, but at that moment, I genuinely thought someone had died and that I was going to die too. Recounting the story, especially now that it has been over a year since the incident, makes my heart race and causes me to experience tunnel vision. Since then, I have avoided urbex. I visited an abandoned hospital, and since then, strange events have been happening. My girlfriend, along with her parents, insisted on visiting this abandoned hospital in Kansas City, Missouri, which has remained vacant since 2001, originally built in 1906. Initially, we couldn't find the entrance, and as we walked around the building, I began to feel sick to my stomach, almost as if I had to use the restroom and couldn't hold it. We finally found a side entrance double door that had been sealed off with wood stapled down the middle. We had ripped it apart and were able to pull the doors open to go inside, then shut them behind us to avoid others coming in and possibly scaring us. It is a total of 6 floors with a basement included and an elevator that no longer functions. As we began walking, I still had that very ill sensation as if I couldn't bear to hold what was inside me. We started exploring, and it just got worse. We ended up exploring the entire building, from the basement where the morgue was to the 6th floor. There were some areas that contained needles, used fluid bags, and other hospital equipment that should have been disposed of before the building was closed. Finally, 2 hours and 10 minutes later, we left the building, and I overall felt a sense of relief. The very next day, in my house, around 12:51 a.m., I remember something in my garage, right next to me, as my room is by the basement, made a loud noise, and my first reaction was that my husky was inside, and I texted my sister, she's 19, to come downstairs. I was gaming at the time and didn't think much of it. She asked what I wanted, and I asked if Sophie, our husky, was inside, and she said no, so I was like, oh okay, well, I heard a loud noise in the garage, and she was hesitant on looking but finally did. She noticed this plastic container had been knocked down. The container had all 4 wheels intact, nothing on top, and it had moved about a foot away from the cage beside it. We were kind of like, oh okay? We didn't know what exactly could have caused it. Definitely not wind, as there is none. We haven't had mice for over a year now, as we previously dealt with a significant mouse issue. Even if we had mice, the object's forceful knockover shows that a mouse couldn't have caused it. First incident. The next, about 3 to 5 days later, my sister is upstairs in our living room that's closer to our backyard, up at 1 a.m., messaging her friend. While replying with a voice message that we had saved, she heard a loud thump or ball noise, similar to a ping pong ball bouncing off something but louder, coming from a section of the room where she insists nothing had fallen to create that sound. Third incident, my mom tells me a few days later she was up at 5 a.m. and heard loud thump noises from my room. She claims it sounded like I was going up the stairs. I was not present that morning or night. She heard it while I was staying at my girlfriend's house. I'm starting to wonder if there is some kind of ghost or something causing these events, or if something else is happening. Because I remember this started happening the day after the hospital visit. In the fourth incident, I was upstairs in my sister's room with my cat, playing with him when, out of nowhere, a window ledge, used for decoration, slid and fell. It is approximately 6 to 7 feet tall and was placed against the wall. My sister claims that given how it was positioned, there is no way it could have fallen without being pushed. As it had about a 65 to 70 degree angle towards the wall, gravity definitely would keep it stable from falling back. At this point, I was thinking, okay, what's going on? Nope, not done yet. Fifth incident, I'm at my girlfriend's house, and my sister is texting me at 12:30 a.m. or some super late time. She sends me video of my kitten being super weird and staring off into a certain part of the living room, the same one she heard the noise from. She sends another video, and this is where it gets spooky. Asher lays down, and as soon as he starts looking away, the noise is heard again, and even Asher hears it as it scares him and makes him look toward the direction of the ceiling/corner of the wall where it seemed to have come from. So now, I'm like, okay, something weird is up. The last incident that happened probably about a month ago, I was lying sleeping in bed, and above me there's this Joker wooden framed picture that's placed directly in the center of my bed about 6 to 10 inches above my head and 2 to 3 inches away from where my head rests. I got up the next day with the picture, which is roughly 1.5 feet in width and 2 feet in height, directly next to my bed in between the cat tower I have in the bed, and it was upside down. I simply couldn't believe it. I kept wondering how the picture could have fallen without waking me up. The nail in the wall was definitely not right, and I could see how it fell as I placed it back, but every time it fell, 3 to 4 times, it fell right behind the bed, as there was a tiny space for it to fit, so I don't know how it ended up next to me and upside down. Since then, nothing unusual has happened besides the garage item falling again, but something was placed above it, and we think it had something to do with it, unlike last time. My kitten also acts crazy around 12 to 1 a.m., but it's normal, according to what Google says. These incidents are unsettling, and I have sound recordings of both occurrences, as well as videos of my kitten. It's just odd. My house, after living 18 to 19 years in it, has never made noise before, and before claiming temperatures dropping can cause pipes to make noises. Keep in mind it's December, yet somehow the weather here is still somewhat warm. Last week we had 70-degree Fahrenheit weather and 50 tornadoes touch down across a few states at the same time. The lonely ghost. So this is a short, cheeky situation that happened to my friends and me in the middle of the summer in Denver, round about 2008. We were bored and sitting around telling stories about the random things that we have done in life, and my time working as a locator for a paranormal hunting group came up. Basically, I was responsible for searching for potential haunts, contacting the owners of the properties they intended to investigate, and arranging all necessary permissions. The group had a lawyer and insurance that handled the waivers and such. I just got them all in touch with each other to make sure everything was above board and legal and that the owner wasn't held liable if one of my idiot hunters went screaming into a hole on the property in the middle of the night. Well, that interested a friend, who at the time was a skeptic of the paranormal. One of my roommates mentioned our basement was haunted, a reoccurring theme in my life, I know. The skeptic said we should do an investigation, which translated into there being 6 of us in the basement sitting in a semicircle with some equipment, asking questions. Most of the people don't matter, save Rob, my best friend, and Goldie, our skeptic friend. Goldie didn't believe in the paranormal and was adamant that all those people are con artists. I guess that included me too, but no worries, I don't take things personally. The basement was an unfinished large room with a metal pole in the middle. We were sitting in front of that pole, and I pulled out a couple of things I still had left over from when the paranormal hunting group broke up. I keep saying hunting and not investigating because these guys were idiots that didn't try to debunk or gather evidence so much as they just ran around a property acting like idiots. I won't mention their names now or the group name because I'm not a petty person. The equipment that was most important to this situation was the thermometer and the recorder. When we started, I gave Goldie the thermometer, and Rob was the recorder guy. Rob had done investigations with me a couple of times in the past, just the two of us, and he knew to call out shuffling or whispered conversation to mark it on the audio. He was also my general sound technician. Whenever I obtained audio evidence, he He was the one who located it for me, so the callouts were intended to assist him in sorting the sounds during playbacks. So we sat, and Goldie commented on how warm the basement was. It was a hot day, and there was no AC venting into the basement. The thermometer said it was in the low 80s. So we sat there for a while asking questions and goofing around in the dark. No one was taking this seriously. After some time I realized half my body was very cold. Goldie commented almost immediately after that, it felt freezing in the room now. She shined a light on the thermometer, and it was down to 44 degrees. We were staring at the readout silently when Rob suddenly yelped and jumped up, then took off upstairs. We followed him into the warm upper level, where Rob was pacing around, hyper and freaked out. This guy was a rock, and here he was babbling like a scared child. Once I calmed him down, he told me what had happened. As we were looking at the temperature, he heard a whisper in his ear and felt a shocking cold sensation on his crotch. Not one to be interested in that kind of experience with the dead, he freaked out and took off. We didn't have any evidence except his recounting of that uncomfortable situation until we reviewed the audio. A clear female voice can be heard right between my comment about the temperature dropping 40 degrees and Rob jumping out of his seat. Goldie freaked out since she was the only woman in the room at the time, and this voice was right next to the mic, while she was at least 8 feet away next to me. These days Goldie is much more open to the idea of ghosts and spirits. And that's the story of the lonely ghost, or the time Rob got groped by the undead. To begin with, I want to say that most people I share this with, including those who are attuned to the paranormal, do not believe me. I don't care whether you do or not. It happened. I can't prove it, but it completely changed my life. When I was 12, my best friend and I were out late on Halloween, early All Saints' Day. Halloween was on Friday, it was almost 3 a.m. on Saturday, ASD. We were walking home after spending a few hours creating mischief around town, including rolling the little police car. The town only had about 1,500 people, so the police station was only the size of a large storage building. We were bummed because we were not ready to go home. As we made our way down the street, I had a brilliant idea. I suggested we explore the old haunted house. The house was built in the 1800s. It was a large 3-story Victorian with balconies and large columns flanking the large double front door. Legend has it that after the last member of the original family died, the house was rented out twice, and both times the families left in the middle of the first night, taking only the clothes on their backs and refusing to return for their belongings. The house had sat empty for almost 50 years. Neighbors had always reported strange sounds and lights coming from the house. Greg looked at it for a minute and finally said, "Okay, I could always talk him into anything." We walked up, forced the front door open halfway, and squeezed in. I checked my watch, it was exactly 3 a.m. Immediately, we heard some growling coming from the next room over. I told Greg to watch out for the dog. I figured if we ran into it, we could tame it, but just in case, let's avoid it. We should have taken heed. We were in a large foyer, there was a door to the right, to the left, and then offset to the left in the center. On the right wall was a large, flowing staircase. Since the growling was coming from the left as best as we could tell, we went to the right. The growling followed us, remaining one room behind, but when we returned, we still couldn't see a dog, and the sound had moved to another room. We made our way around the bottom floor, it was in a large circle. As we did, we began to hear other sounds that we couldn't identify. Then we moved to the second floor. The growling followed us. The other noises increased. There were 4 bedrooms on this level. As we went through them, the armoires, dressers, dressing tables, chiffoniers, and other furniture were still full of clothes and other personal items. Mattresses were still on the beds, well, what was left of them. All rooms had water damage to the ceilings and walls. There was a smaller yet still fancy staircase to the 3rd floor. We headed up. The first thing we noticed as we started up the stairs was that there was a huge hole in the roof where it had collapsed. Parts of the roof littered the floor. Right as we stepped on the top landing, we were swarmed by a group of bats. They were just normal insect bats, but it was still unnerving. We stepped over the debris as we inspected the 3 bedrooms on this level. We entered the middle room and disturbed a flock of black birds, which also swarmed us. With the growling getting louder, the other sounds getting louder and more numerous, the bats and blackbirds really set us on edge. We finished looking at the last room and decided to leave. Both of us were becoming increasingly nervous due to the ongoing commotion. We made our way back down, disturbing another set of bats on the 2nd floor. And I wondered why we didn't disturb them on the way up. We reached the main floor and looked around one last time for the dog. At this point, I began to wonder if it was actually a coyote, because that growl did not sound like a dog's. Everything was quiet other than the growling and all the other noises. Until I stepped out the front door, and there were several cop cars and fire trucks all over the lawn and street. I looked to my right, and I could see where the house was on fire. As a matter of fact, I could see a hole in the side of the house large enough for a man to step through to the dining room. Startled, I backed back into the house and looked in the dining room. No hole, no fire, nothing. I stepped back through the door and was almost run over by two firemen with a hose headed into the house. It seemed they didn't see us. We walked across the lawn and stepped behind the police line, as all the neighbors had come out to see the commotion. We were not seen until we stepped behind the police line. A cop told us it was too early for kids to be out, we needed to get home. We agreed. I looked at my watch again, it was 3:03. We walked out at the exact same time we walked in. I was confused but decided not to question it. The cop verified that it was just 3 o'clock. The house burned down to ashes that morning. Mom picked me up that afternoon, and we had to go by one of her friends' houses. As we walked into that lady's house, I felt this strange vibration type feeling. It wasn't a vibration, that's just the only way I can describe it. I've never felt it before, but I have felt it a lot since. I didn't understand what it was, but it quit as soon as I left. This happened several times over the years. I learned to ignore it until I was 16 and I walked into a friend's house that I had never been to. But there were a lot of us there, we were going to watch a movie. I stepped into her house, and I felt that familiar sensation, but this time it was different. It was still a vibration type feeling, just unlike what I had experienced before. Then suddenly a couple of people screamed. They said they saw a scary looking figure looking through the doorway watching them. That's when our host said her house was haunted. At this point I connected the feelings, the haunted house, and the spirits. A few more years passed, and I still didn't know anything about the vibration feeling. I was at another friend's house one day when his mother pulled out a Ouija board. I knew better, so I went into the other room. A few moments later, I felt the second feeling, strongly. I suddenly understood what was going on. I got up and stepped back in the other room and told the mother to close out the session. She said she was just talking to Bruce, a good spirit she had talked to several times. I told her no, that spirit was evil. I don't know how I knew that, I just did. But before I even said it was evil, the planchette said, "Kill Randy, me." Mom asked why. It said he's dangerous to me. That's when I said it's evil. As soon as I said it's evil, the planchette flew across the room, missing my head by just 1/4 of an inch. I didn't flinch at all, even when it hit the wall hard enough to leave a small hole in the wall. I walked over to the board, placed my hand on it, and said, "You must leave, and you're not allowed to ever return here." There was a large electric feeling, and the board jumped about 2 inches off the table. She never contacted that spirit again. There were a few more small interactions over the next few years, but nothing worth talking about. So please let me know what you think. Do you believe it or not? As I said, I really don't care whether you believe it or not, so you're not going to hurt my feelings. But I would like to have an open discussion about these events, both for you and me. I had never had any kind of paranormal event until I went through that house. I really believe something happened to me there that led me to where I am. I know how movie-ish this story sounds, but this is how it happened. You understand the paranormal world, so I do hope you can understand what happened to me that morning. A weird ghost hunt. I spent many years stationed in Germany. I did 2 years of tours mostly, and each was in a different place. This occurred while stationed in Kitzingen, Larsen Barracks. That base was flanked by forest. There was an old abbey located a couple of miles away through the forest that was said to be haunted. A couple other guys in my company were interested in ghosts, too. We had investigated a few of the castles around the general area, so when we heard about this place, it was a no-brainer. Our plan was to set out Friday after last formation and make the hike and set up camp. We slept that night, and the next morning we went to the Abbey. It had been closed for years, but it was open during the day for tours. After it closed for the day, no one was supposed to be on the grounds, but there was no enforcement or patrol. It was basically left open. Upon arriving, we took the tour and learned the history and layout. Around noon we went back to camp to fix some lunch and relax before ghost hunting around 10 p.m. When we reached camp, it was destroyed. It appeared that some kind of animal had gotten into everything. It scattered all our personal items from our backpacks, tore down our shelter halves, and created a significant mess without causing any major damage. We cleaned up and reset camp. None of our food was missing, but that wasn't surprising since most of it was in cans. It was surprising that the couple of boxes of crackers and the loaf of bread had not been taken or damaged. Around 10 p.m. that night we went back to the Abbey. We investigated it thoroughly inside and out. We never heard or saw a thing. We stuck it out until around 4 a.m. hoping something might show up, but nothing did. We made our way back to camp disappointed and tired. When we got there, that animal had been back. It had done the exact same thing as before, except this time those boxes of crackers and loaves of bread were scattered around like everything else, out of the wrappers and on the ground. We were pretty pissed off. If we had been able to see our way to hike out, we would have done so, but the woods were too dark. After cleaning up once more, we crashed for a few hours before the light started to go out. One of the guys yelled and cursed up a storm, startling me awake 2 hours later. Camp was trashed again, and we had slept through it. Even our shelter halves had been ripped down as we slept under them. The only difference was that our personal items, socks, underwear, and t-shirts were made into a trail leading out of camp. We packed up everything and started following the trail of clothing. When we reached the last of it, there was a small pile consisting of one pair of underwear belonging to each of us, and the crotch had been ripped out of each one. About 100 away, we could see the perimeter fence to our base. I never went back into that forest the rest of the time I was stationed there. In an old, nearly forgotten graveyard. So, first off, I admit I generally don't believe most ghost stories I hear. I mean, they are mostly made up. That said, I have seen a ghost, indisputable proof as far as I'm concerned. Let me take you back to when I was probably 12 or 13 and tell you a little story of how I thought I was going to die. For a little backstory, there was a graveyard in our small town, 7K people, that was on a dirt road about a mile from anything. I lived on that dirt road, which was just outside of town to accommodate our horses, but it was a few miles away from the graveyard. The graveyard was much further out. Everyone knew about it, it even had a great axe murderer ghost story to it. I knew where it was but had never been. When I was in 7th grade, well, the summer between 7 and 8, one of my good friend's grandfathers had come to town for a visit. I had met most of his family over the years but had never heard of his granddad, so I was surprised to find out he was in town. Since I spent most days with my friend, typically at his house, it was in town, closer to video games, I met him and spent time talking to him and got to know him a little. His wife had passed away many years prior, I imagine at the age of 12, it seemed as though she had died during the Civil War, and he spent his retirement traveling across America, looking for haunted places. Now, as an adult, I have numerous questions regarding that, but at the time, I simply accepted it and did not dwell on it. One night after dinner at my friend's house, Granddad asked if there were any haunted places in town. My friend's parents dismissed the idea and said there were no haunted places, but when they left the room, my friend said, "There is a haunted cemetery." I mentioned my disbelief, but Granddad's, sorry, I was too self-absorbed at the time to learn his name, eyes lit up, and he asked where it was. Obviously my friend was quick to tell him. So, whereas my friend's house was in town, it was about half a mile from my dirt road. I was about 3 miles one way, the graveyard was about 1 mile the other way. It was close. Armed with this knowledge, Granddad decided that we would walk to the graveyard the next night. I was pragmatic and risk-averse in those days and expressed my concern with walking to an isolated graveyard in the middle of nowhere at midnight. Oh yeah, he wanted to be there at midnight, but he assured me that he had encountered many ghosts and that we would be safe. Not really believing the place was haunted, I agreed to go. Man, this is long, sorry. I've never put this in writing, so I'm trying to capture everything. It's about to get good, though. If scaring children to death is good. So, I go over to my friend's house the next day. I practically live there in the summer, and we hang out and do our thing, but Granddad just seems lit up with excitement. I thought about telling him the ghost stories were made up, but we had a pass to stay up all night, and I wasn't about to mess that up. He would have to deal with his disappointment on his own time. Not knowing exactly how far it was, believe it or not, smartphones haven't been around forever, we headed out at like 10:30, to walk down a dirt road for over a mile with no house or building along the way. No street lights on dirt roads to nowhere. The dirt road came along the south side of the cemetery to where it intersected with the dirt road the entrance is on. All along the cemetery was a small grove of trees, blocking all views into it. You knew it was on the other side of the wrought iron fence, you just couldn't see in. We turned onto the next dirt road to the entrance of the cemetery and walked up to the gates. Oh yeah, there were gates. Very old wrought iron gates with an arch on top. On each side of the narrow dirt road lined with pine trees leading in was a stone gargoyle. I kid you not, stone gargoyles and wrought iron. We went in and walked the 500 feet or so to the end of the road. It was one road that circled a statue of Christ, someone had money, in a teardrop shape at the end, and you go back the way you came. Not built for two-way traffic. The cemetery was primarily located on the left, north, side, with a few tombstones on the right, but trees obstructed the view in that direction. When we got to the end, it was probably 11:30, but I didn't have a watch and couldn't be sure. We talked about how legend has it that the Christ statue bleeds on Halloween, believable, right? And that there is an axe murderer, whose name no one knows. Understand my skepticism? That was buried and haunting the place. We talked like this for a while, and at some point my friend started arguing with his granddad. And that's when I heard it. Click. That was it, one click, then nothing. At the time it sounded like two rocks being struck together, like small rocks, but I can assure you after much trial and error, that wasn't exactly the sound. A few minutes later, again, assuming the time here, my friend still arguing, I hear click. Only this time it was in a different location. That must have been when my spidey sense started kicking in because I started telling them to shut up and listen, but they didn't. Click, again from somewhere else. This time my friend's granddad was like, "Did you hear that?" I imagine my response was typical of a 12-year-old who had been trying to tell you. I don't know if I said anything. A few moments later, click, click. WTF? Did it just go from 1 to 2? Also from a completely different location. I don't know if it was a full moon, but if it wasn't, it was close because it was pretty bright out there. I'm looking all through the graveyard for any movement. Click, click. Now my friend and I are pretty ducking nervous, not really sure what's going on, but I know I don't like it. Click, click, it's never from the same place, and we don't see anyone moving. Granddad lies on his stomach and starts looking across the graveyard. I'm sure someone asked, he told us. You could see movement against the skyline better, which, amazingly, in the bright moonlight, you could. All three of us are lying in the grass. Click, click, click. I couldn't explain why, but I knew we were in trouble when it made 3 clicks. It kept coming from different places, so I sure wasn't going anywhere, which I think deep down I also realized was a problem. All of us were silent, straining to see any movement ahead. It sounded close, but not right there, if that makes sense. Click, click, click is still moving around. Duck, like I know time is running out. Granddad also seems agitated. My friend was looking at how I imagine I was looking. No movement, no sound. No wind. Click, click, click. At that moment, something came walking towards us. It was right there, maybe 12 feet away and coming towards us. One moment it wasn't there, and the next it was. It didn't seem like it had just appeared, but rather that there was a shrub I hadn't noticed until it stood up and came toward me. I really can't explain that part, it was just there. I'm scrambling to my feet, my friend is clawing his way to his feet, and Granddad slowly stands up and tells us to run. Well, no shit, we were already moving. In that moment when time seems to slow down due to extreme fear, I made a conscious effort to look at the creature's feet. Without dating myself too badly, when I was a kid, the killer in the slasher movies always wore boots. I guess I was just looking for confirmation that we really were going to die. There were no feet. What approached us was like cloaked, the outside gray, and the inside completely pitch black. No feet. I could clearly see under it, I was lying down, remember. Some robed figure was quickly advancing. My friend and I started running towards the gate, and sure as hell that thing lit out after us. Granddad started yelling some strange Latin phrases. It began with "Ka Re." I later discovered it as a Pueblo Indian chant meant to ward off the dead, and the figure stopped, alternating its gaze between us and him as if making a decision, before sinking into the ground. Gone. We didn't stop, we kept running until we were on the dirt road and waited for Granddad. He came walking out, excited as hell, but we were no longer amused and wanted to go home. We walked the 100 feet to my dirt road and then walked past the wooded cemetery again. About halfway past, we heard the most chilling scream from the graveyard. We all stopped. That was definitely the closest I've ever come to pissing myself. My blood froze, my hair stood up, and I shivered. It scared me. Granddad takes a step back towards the graveyard, and we are like, WTF? Where are you going? He tells us someone might need help. I remember looking at him and saying, yeah, we need to get home. We turned and walked the rest of the way to my friend's house. As we were going to sleep, Granddad stops by the room and says, let's go again tomorrow night. I explored my empty school, and I regret it. I stayed late at school to get a notebook I had left in my locker, and I did not expect anything unusual, but as soon as I walked in, it felt different. The halls were quiet and empty, and the usual sounds of the school were gone. I started walking toward my locker, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move, but when I looked directly, there was nothing there. I heard a soft scraping sound behind me like someone dragging their feet, but no one was there. My heart started beating faster, but I told myself it was probably just the echo of my own footsteps. When I bent down to grab my notebook, I felt like someone was right behind me, and I froze. The silence pressed in, and then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps following me as I walked down the hall toward the exit. I called out, but there was no answer, and the lights flickered once before going out, leaving me in a dim emergency light. Halfway to the door I thought I heard my name whispered, and for a moment I panicked, feeling something was watching me. I froze for a second, and in that moment I saw a dark shape move quickly around the corner of a classroom and disappear. My heart dropped, and I started running faster than I ever had, trying not to trip on the tiles as I reached the main door and stepped outside. As soon as I locked the door behind me, the feeling lifted, but I was shaking all the way home. That night when I checked my phone, I found a short video I did not remember recording showing an empty hallway, and at the very end you could hear slow footsteps and a faint whisper of my name. Months later a couple of friends told me they had also stayed late at school, and each of them had similar experiences with doors moving on their own footsteps when no one was there and strange cold spots in empty hallways. One friend even said she saw something move out of the corner of her eye, but when she turned, there was nothing there. I never stayed late again, and now whenever I walk past the school at night, I get a sinking feeling like something is still inside the empty halls watching, and I do not know what it is, but I regret ever going back to that school after hours, and I will never make that mistake again. Midnight visits to Apple Chapel. Living in a small town, one of my favorite things to do is cruising the back roads and exploring. I've always been fascinated to see where the drive takes me, checking out scenery and happening upon houses that I wouldn't normally see on the main roads. And sometimes I like to travel some of the roads I have previously discovered after dark. Sometimes. When I was around 13 or 14, one of my adventures led me to a little church named Apple Chapel. At this age I was still too young to be driving, but my uncle, the antique dealer, shared this passion with me. It's in the middle of nowhere in southern Indiana. Attached to the church is a small, quaint graveyard to the right. On the left is a gravel parking lot. It is surrounded by woods. To see this place in broad daylight, most people wouldn't bat an eye. It's actually not spooky looking. Youngs Creek, Indiana. I felt a sense of unease nearly a mile before passing Apple Chapel, the day I discovered the small lane that led to the church. Didn't even see it yet, let alone know it was there. I remember feeling strange, getting goosebumps, the whole 9 yards. So did my uncle. He turned the music off and slowed the car. This is still in daylight. My uncle asked me, "Do you feel that?" "Yup. It feels like we shouldn't be here for some reason," was my response. "Or something similar." "What do you think is?" He slammed on the brakes, nearly choking me with the seatbelt. At first I was looking at him, but I instantly followed his gaze. There it was, the church with its tombstones. I saw the graveyard first because it was on my right side, nearly 15 feet away or so. My breath caught, and I thought I was too young for a heart attack. It was instant bad vibes. Although it didn't look creepy, it felt creepy. We later confided with each other that it was almost as if we could feel vibrations, actual, physical vibrations, emanating from all around us. So, my uncle pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. I hesitantly followed. We didn't say much at this point, but I could tell he was shaken by this place to the extent that I could see his hand slightly tremble when he lit a cigarette. We didn't stay long, we just walked through the cemetery, looking at different headstones. Then left. It was eerie, the way we both felt something ominous, out of place, at the same time. Really ducking weird. That was the beginning of several more visits to Apple Chapel. What frightened us also fascinated us. When at school, I asked around to see if anyone had any information about the place. Nope. Checked the local library and found nothing. Basically, could not find anything about the little church in the remote location. To this day, I have not encountered anyone from Apple Chapel who has had bad feelings, ghost stories, or anything unusual happen to them. The first time my uncle and I went there after nightfall was nothing to brag about, really, but we still felt an evil presence, and the creep factor was through the roof. If I remember correctly, there might have been a security light on the parking lot side of the building but not the graveyard side. Seems like that was the case. We drove by crawling at a snail's pace, it being on the passenger side of the car. Go figure, right next to me if the dead suddenly sprang to life, not that I believe in that, but it was part of the creep factor. I remember the moon being out but not bright. Heard twigs breaking from the woods nearby, probably a deer. But other than that, it was too quiet. No other sounds, period, no frogs, or owls, or crickets, or even noise from the wind. Dead silent except for the twigs and the sound of the tires on the pavement. We left. After leaving, it took us both several miles to shake the uneasiness. Hell, I still felt it after arriving back home. Now, this was not a nightly occurrence. We knew better than to take a midnight cruise out there very often. Occasionally, though, we would take someone with us. One time, on an after-dark cruise, I brought one of my friends along for the ride. We were having fun jamming to music and talking and whatnot. My uncle made it a point to avoid Apple Chapel that night, driving 25 miles south of it on the highway. On the return trip home he decided to use his GPS and take some country roads back. This was not in the vicinity of the chapel. About 45 minutes later, traveling roads we have never been on before, his GPS suddenly goes bonkers and croaks. It just started going fuzzy like and died. Which it shouldn't have because it was wired through the car and used the car's battery. So now we were lost, in an unfamiliar neck of the woods, with a little less than half a tank of gas. Duck me running. About 5 to 6 minutes later there's the damn church. 2 notes here. 1. We were familiar with the area surrounding the church, even after midnight, and we didn't notice anything we recognized before seeing the church. 2. My uncle didn't plan for this, as he intentionally wanted to avoid it that particular night. My uncle's face went from trying to joke about being lost to oh shit real quick. Needless to say, I informed my buddy of finding Apple Chapel by accident and how it freaked me out, yet I still felt compelled to check it out every so often. Like drawn to it. He dismissed my concerns with laughter and made jokes about it. We made it back home safely. I will never forget this. We should have stayed far away from Apple Chapel, but we did not. On a school night, after talking with my uncle and reminiscing about our ghostly experiences, for some reason we had quite a lot of encounters together, he asks me if I want to take a short cruise. As the next day I had school, I was reluctant but agreed. Our destination was, of course, Apple Chapel. This was around 9:30 or 9:45 p.m. From where I lived, it took about 20 to 25 minutes to get there. We would be gone for an hour tops. Okay, sure, let's go. We're almost there. The hairs on my arms stand on end. Chills travel my spine. I can feel it in my bones. Suddenly, my teeth chatter. Feels like the temperature dropped 15 degrees. The car thermometer read 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Pretty sure the temp did in fact drop. The church comes into view with the headlights. Pitch black tonight. No moon. Also no security light. My uncle pulls the car slightly off the road and comes to a stop. I just want to look around for a few, then we will head back home, he says. I shrugged and said, okay. We have done this before. Just parked next to the graveyard, got out, and walked a bit, just seeing if anything weird would happen. He shut the car off. Extinguished the headlights. Got out into the front of the car, just to my side of the vehicle. No more than a minute had passed. I was ready to get to bed. Uncle James, I have school tomorrow. Nothing is happening tonight. It's too dark to really see anything anyway, and I'm freezing. Let's go. That's all I said. Yeah, you're right. Let's boogie back, he replied. This all happened with a minute or two of him shutting the car off. So, he gets in the car and turns the key over. Click click click. Nothing. Tries again. Click click click. Still nothing. He tries a third time, but it is still unsuccessful. You can hear the starter grow weaker through each attempt. Keep in mind that the car is in pretty good shape. He's had no problems with it besides the GPS going out, and now this. He even had the GPS looked at but never had it fixed, no signs of any trouble whatsoever. I'm freaking the hell out. James, this can't be happening. What the duck do we do? I've got school tomorrow. We don't have a cell phone. Why tonight? I literally sounded like a frantic girl lol. Thanks, puberty and sheer terror, I'm a guy, BTW. The more we tried to start the car, the weaker it got. I tried jumping the solenoid. Nope. Tried everything we could possibly think of with the car. Nothing worked. We had to stay the ducking night. We're definitely not going to walk several miles in either direction at this time of night. Not way out in the sticks. We could be food for coyotes or other creatures of the night. We could wander onto someone's property and be shot at. Anything was possible. It seemed like hours passed, and there we sat in the cold car, trying to survive for the night. I'd say the temperature was in the mid-30s at this point. I finally got the nerve to check the trunk. Maybe there was something there we could use for warmth. My uncle got out with my scared ass. That's when we heard it. We heard a sharp crack, similar to the sound of an axe splitting wood. It came from the opposite side of the road down in the woods a little ways. And at the exact same moment we heard what sounded like deep, quiet chuckling in the woods behind the cemetery. My uncle said, "What the duck was that?" Me, I don't know. And I hope we don't find out. I called out to see if I would get a response. Nothing, Then we saw what looked like the faint glow of an old lantern about 20 to 30 feet behind the tree line of the graveyard. It swung lightly, and I only got a brief glimpse of it before it disappeared. This took place while I did indeed find a flimsy, thin blanket in the trunk. This was something my uncle used to wrap around antiques that he had forgotten about. "Duck this, help me push the car past the church and next to the gravel lot on the other side," I told my uncle. We managed to do so, too. By this time, it was past midnight, and the entire time we were stranded, not a single car had gone by. By 2 a.m. our fear had subsided slightly. Around 2:30 we heard what sounded like a baby crying behind us, further up the road beyond the cemetery. I'm pretty sure it was a coyote, but it still put me on edge again. Around 3 a.m. I heard an indistinguishable sound, and when I looked at the graveyard behind us, I swore I saw a dark shape moving in the shadows. Like shadows, it's likely it could have been tree limbs moving, but I don't believe that. My uncle saw the movement as well, and we thought it was some dark entity. Who knows? I finally crashed from my adrenaline rush shortly after that. When I woke up, it was turning daylight. My uncle said someone went by but didn't stop. So we put the car at an angle in the road, forcing whoever was next to come to our rescue. It was a school bus. The driver said he radioed it in. We moved the car so he could be on his way. 2 more vehicles passed. We put the car back at an angle, and finally a DNR, Department of Natural Resources, guy helped us. We didn't tell him exactly what happened, only that the car died and wouldn't restart as we were passing through. The very next day my uncle was in front of a prestigious hotel in our area. French Lick, Indiana. He was stopping to get gas. Before he turned into the gas station, the car caught on fire. He left it sitting at the intersection, and before he reached the gas pumps, the car literally exploded. We always said that a demon got into the car that night. It's hard to say that for sure, but I'm a true believer in the paranormal. Black Shadow, Nun? At abandoned girls' Catholic school. To begin, I am very skeptical of the paranormal. Always have been, always will be. However, I keep an open mind, as there are some things that simply have not yet been explained. Backstory: last night, 2 of my friends, neither of whom are the ghost hunting type, and I decided to check out an abandoned school, which was part of Villa Maria, in the town we were in. Having done only minimal research, we located the school at the edge of dark about 30 minutes after sunset. There was still adequate light to walk around and enough to read the bright green condemned notice posted on all the doors of the school. We parked about 2 blocks away in the middle of what I took to be an older, upper-middle-class neighborhood. After passing several people on our stroll to the school, we dipped behind the bushes for cover as quickly as we could. The school was overgrown with ivy, and many windows were broken for easy access. We rounded the right side of the building, taking our time and being as quiet and mindful of the neighbors as we could. There were about 10 deer in the backfield watching us as we went. After making it to the back of the school, we were able to see a large room by shining our phone lights through a broken window. My friend contemplated whether he would be able to fit through the small opening, and even with my 125-pound body, I realized that it would not have been easy to enter or escape, which is a significant concern for me when entering unfamiliar places. What they saw after passing the set of low windows, I walked up to what appeared to be a boarded-up entrance. I found out quickly that there were glass windows behind the broken openings in the plywood, so we'd have to find another way. While I was inspecting this, my 2 friends had been about 10 feet behind me. They looked at each other, asking, "Did you see that?" I was like, "What did you see?" as I had been looking elsewhere. Both had seen a shadow on the roof about 15 feet above me that they described as being too large to be someone's head. They say it was shaped like the top half of an oval, which is all they could see as the rest was obscured by the building. It had no details other than a very dark black, too dark to be the face of a person or even the shadow from the underside of something. It moved diagonally from top left to bottom right as it disappeared from view. As soon as they looked at it simultaneously, it disappeared in this strange motion in about 1 second or less. I didn't see it, so I questioned them. Could it have been a cat? No. There was no tail or ears, and it was too large to have been a head peeking over the edge. Could it have been a person? Not unless they were wearing a huge dark hoodie and it was the back of their head and their head was huge. After going through what seemed like every logical scenario, we have concluded that it just doesn't make sense. On the ride home, after doing more research, we found out it was an old Catholic school for girls, with nuns that taught. A nun's veil would describe this shape and large size and be consistent with the history. I am still skeptical to believe we saw a dead nun or spirit or whatever it may be. I had driven probably 300 or 400 miles that day before we got to our town. My friend insisted we both follow her home and walk her inside, which we did. When I arrived at her house, my odometer read 188,666.0. Precisely. My other friend said as soon as he got in his car, he heard a strange voice come over his car, like a robot, but didn't know what it had said, and he was FaceTiming someone who heard it as well. I am wondering if this could have just been audio feedback from the FaceTime call, but he drove with his interior lights on after he got it to stop. I have never had a paranormal experience to my knowledge, besides hearing unexplained footsteps in another abandoned building. If I've experienced anything, I've likely written it off or explained it in a more logical way. Neither of my friends has had an experience like this either. What do you think? What could it have been? Is my odometer a coincidence? The only time I have seen possession is as someone who goes paranormal exploring as a hobby. Okay, so I have a quick disclaimer. I don't claim to be an expert on the paranormal, but I have been exploring it close to twice a fortnight, maybe more, for the past year, mostly with a friend of mine. I believe my friend was possessed, but feel free to listen and comment on your thoughts, as I'd love to hear other inputs. I went to explore Kingseat Hospital, which closed in July 1999. The closure was part of New Zealand's move from large psychiatric institutions to community-based mental health care. While it was open, there were allegations of patient abuse and mistreatment, which contributed to its controversial reputation. Today, many people believe the site's dark history and abandoned buildings contribute to its haunting reputation. A friend and I visited the site to explore and see if we could observe anything unusual. As we drove through the gates, we noticed several buildings on the property, with the main reception visible through the trees beyond a small roundabout. And the main reception building is this massive, towering building, all run down and pretty creepy looking. However, when we looked around, we realized that people actually lived in all the surrounding buildings. Later, we found out that the surrounding buildings were rented out cheaply, as we saw clothing on washing lines, a couple of cars, kids' bikes, and other signs of life. We entered the main reception building through a side window that was not very high off the ground, hoping that nobody lived inside the main building. We later discovered that renting any part of that building was not possible, and once inside, we took a brief walk around the halls, realizing that this place is in a state of disrepair. There was lots of damage and vandalism, along with feelings of dread, hopelessness, and even anger. It felt like I could feel the feelings of those who possibly were housed here, unlike almost anything I've felt before while exploring somewhere like this. My friend was also a much more experienced person when it came to paranormal investigations and is also a type 2 diabetic, but despite that, he's pretty fit. We were walking down this hallway on the second floor when we came to this double door, which was halfway open, and we decided to go in, and it was this large room with what looked like literal ducking blood stains still on the floor and what looked like scratch marks on the hardwood floor and even the walls, like someone was trying to claw their way out or something. And we don't have many wild animals in my country, only possums, cats, and dogs for the most part. This was the point where it was just too much for both of us, and we turned to leave, and just as we were coming to the stairwell to go downstairs, I turned around to see my mate slumped over the inner windowsill looking outside towards the roundabout on the way in, which was weird to me because I didn't hear him make a noise to indicate he'd fallen over or anything, so I turned around to ask what he was doing, and he was slurring his words and mumbling. I thought he was having a diabetic episode, and I knew he didn't have an insulin pen with him. I picked him up, slung his arm over my shoulder, and started to walk him out, but then I realized that I had been with him all day, he hadn't had any sugar, and I've known this guy for years, so I understand how he reacts when he does. He knows his sugar limits well, and aside from a headache or being dehydrated, I've never seen him like this before. But it didn't matter at that point. As we walk, he struggles to speak, he mumbles his words and talks quietly, so I lean in to ask what he's saying, but he doesn't make any sense, and I can't hear him at all. By the time we finally make it down the stairs, which feels like it takes forever, I feel extremely stressed, along with overwhelming feelings of dread and anxiety. Out of nowhere he starts yelling freakishly loud, and from someone who a second ago couldn't even speak a sentence, now he's yelling louder than I've ever heard him before. And he's yelling all this nonsense like he's speaking in a language I've never heard, and when I look at his eyes are in the back of his head, and his legs give out from under him. At this point, I started to consider that this might be more than just a diabetic crash, and I started praying because that was the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the wooden cross necklace off my neck and put it on him as I went to pick him up to walk through this door to the room with the window we came in through. I heard this door slam upstairs, which scared the shit out of me again. And I start moving as fast as I can with him, but he's a little heavier than me, but with all this adrenaline and anxiety I was feeling, I managed to lift most of his weight to the point where he starts walking with me again to the window and just trying to keep praying. And as I start to pray louder and we're getting right up to the window, I hear the unmistakable sound of something stomping down the stairs. So I slump his top half on the window and push him while he's lying sideways kind of on this window and just push him out before jumping out after him. When we got out of the building, he was still in this weird state but no longer yelling or even speaking. I kept praying while trying to carry him again all the way till we got to the car just around the corner in front of the building, and I dump him in the passenger seat, run around the car, and boost off as fast as I can, and this is about when he actually starts to come to, and again, I'm still praying, I haven't stopped this whole time. He only truly came right as we were coming towards the gate, and he's asking me what happened because his shoulder hurt, and I'm trying to explain what happened, but he has no recollection of where he is or what happened, and he's confused and dazed, but eventually when we got home, I did manage to explain the full story, and his face was so shocked, and he looked petrified. He said he's never had a diabetic crash like that, even to this day, and again, he had no sugary drinks, food, or anything whatsoever that day, since he can usually feel these crashes come on beforehand. We believe that he was possessed, but you guys can decide that for yourselves. The fact that he was speaking in what I think were tongues, couldn't walk, had no recollection of what happened, and only really started coming to us as we were leaving and I was praying. The door slamming and the footsteps I heard when I started praying completely confirmed for me that place was truly haunted. That was the first time I genuinely witnessed a paranormal experience in which I felt actual danger. I also understand that these events can have logical explanations, such as the door being moved by the wind and his unusual behavior possibly indicating a diabetic crash. But with all the things that happened in such a short time given the circumstances and just the whole feeling, such a diabetic crash is completely unheard of for him. He also, to this day, cannot remember what fully happened in the building. The last thing he remembers was being in the room with what looked like blood, and from there it went blank. We are personally convinced he was possessed. But please leave your thoughts and questions below. Possible demon encounter in a brick factory. For some context, I used to love exploring abandoned places, and I've traveled around a lot exploring them. I've had some pretty spooky encounters with people or a building being not as safe as I thought it was. I always carry a pocket knife or a knife with me for safety after being chased out of a building by a few individuals in Texas. I will refrain from disclosing the names of the locations I have visited, as I wish to prevent any potential discovery and vandalism of these sites, which were either intriguing or had individuals residing in them without permission. But there's this one incident that I've had. After that incident, I decided to stop exploring abandoned places. I entered an old brick factory that was largely overtaken by nature, and I descended into the basement. The place is pretty messed up, there are some areas that were flooded, and I keep walking there. I enter this room, it had multiple different entrances and a big hallway, and I'm looking around this area, and I shine my light down this hallway, and someone comes out of the doorway down the hall, and I'll never forget this, they looked extremely sick, it looked like they had infections all over their skin, and there was something coming out of their eye. Naturally, I quickly left the area while they screamed and chased me. Their scream was not human but rather a horrific, inhuman sound. And when I got out of the basement, they kept chasing me, and I ran through the ducking factory. Then when I got to the front door, I just kept running. That's why I'll never go into an abandoned building again. Duck that. Paranormal School. My friends and I, whom I will refer to as A,
E, S, and D if necessary, had been getting into paranormal investigations over the past few years.
We aren't professionals by any means, nor do we claim to be. It's just something that we enjoy doing whenever we're all able to get together. We've gone to a few supposedly haunted locations and done some investigations, but nothing prepared us for what we experienced in this story. So one day we were discussing where we should go for our next paranormal investigation. We had just finished another investigation a couple nights prior, so we were still feeling brave from that. As we were discussing where we should go, one of our friends suggested that we should check out this old abandoned school in rural Tennessee. We had heard stories about this school from videos and from just online searches. If you know the story about the boy who was bullied to death and buried underneath the floorboards, then you'll know what school I am referring to. If you don't know the story, then I'll give you a brief summary. A young boy was cornered in the boys' bathroom at this school by a bully. The bully beat him up so badly that he ended up succumbing to his injuries and died on the spot. The bully, in a panic, realizing what he had just done, decided to pull up some of the floorboards with his pocket knife and stash his body underneath them. Because of how bad it was, it is said that something very dark and malevolent is said to haunt the school, as well as the boy. Some even speculate that this dark spirit is what drove the bully to take it too far and end the boy. Now back to the story. Sadly, our friend A wasn't able to come with us on this investigation. So I invited another of my friends, whom I'll refer to as H. H wasn't really into the paranormal like the rest of us are, but agreed to come anyways, just to hang out and have something to do. So we all got into our cars and drove to the school, hoping to have some paranormal experiences and maybe even capture some paranormal evidence that we could show off online. When we got to the school, we quickly realized that the pictures and videos we had seen online did not do the real thing justice. It was creepy. The entire place was covered in shrubbery, vines, and graffiti. The windows had been busted out, and the doors were off their hinges, presumably from all the local kids looking to get a rush by breaking into and exploring a creepy abandoned school. We walked around the school and eventually found the entrance to the basement, which apparently you are not supposed to go into. Especially the boiler room. Not just because the whole building was on the brink of collapse, but also because that's where IT primarily lives. So, of course, that's one of the first places we wanted to go. We walked around the basement and did some exploring, just to survey the area and to get a better idea of where we wanted to begin our investigation. We eventually did find the boiler room, and at first glance it didn't seem like anything special. Just some broken down equipment, graffitied walls, trash thrown all over the place, and a random school chair sitting in the corner. E laughed and made the comment, "It must not be a very powerful spirit if this is where it has to live." We all let out a little chuckle in agreement and continued on our way through the basement. Thinking back now, that may not have been the best comment to make about this thing and its home. We exited the basement and went into the main area of the school. The main area wasn't any better than the basement. Graffiti and trash were everywhere, the ceiling was falling in, and the floor was collapsing in some areas. We explored the halls, some classrooms, and the gym, and we even found the bathroom where the bullied boy was supposedly buried underneath the floorboards. After exploring for a little while longer, we decided to start our investigation. We set up a couple cameras, motion sensor lights, and voice recorders in some of the classrooms, the hall, and the bathroom. As we were doing our investigation, 3 of us were in one of the classrooms while H and I were in the hall right outside. The 3 of us that were in the classroom were playing around with some dowsing rods and a spirit box. If you don't know what dowsing rods are, they are basically 2 copper rods that can spin freely, and they are used as a way for spirits to communicate with you, either by crossing the rods or pointing. The spirit box is a device that quickly cycles through radio waves and allows spirits to talk through the frequencies. As they were asking their questions in the classroom, H and I were staring down the hall. At the end of this hall, we assumed there was a staircase, but we couldn't be certain because we couldn't reach that area due to the collapsed floor. As our friend and I were looking down this hall, we heard a loud bang come from the far end where this staircase was. We quickly shined our lights in the direction of the noise, but we didn't see anything. We kept watching for a minute just in case something or someone came out. But after a few minutes of nothing, we just assumed it was an animal or something. Eventually I made my way into the classroom with the others while H stayed in the hall. As we were asking our questions and hoping for a response through the dowsing rods or spirit box, I noticed H in the hall. He was ghostly white and fixated on the area where we had heard that noise prior. I asked him, "What's wrong?" He replied, "I don't want to freak you guys out, but I swear I just saw someone poke their head out from around the corner and look right at me." We were all kind of like, "Oh, it's probably just your mind playing tricks on you," but he was still very insistent on what he saw. Now we had seen and heard things during our investigations before, but something about the way H looked had us all a little spooked. H insisted that we should move on to another area, so we obliged him and went back to the main foyer where we had entered. We were standing there talking about where we should go next when we heard what sounded like a child's laugh coming from the classroom where we had just been. We all instinctively shut up and froze in place. Finally, our friend S broke the silence. "What was that?" Eventually, E built up the courage to go see what it was. He started making his way back to the classroom when something told me that it wasn't safe for him to go back in there. I quickly grabbed his arm and said, "I don't think that's a good idea," to which he brushed off and proceeded to head towards the classroom. A split second later we heard a loud crunch and a crash come from the room, so we all ran to see what it was. When we reached the classroom, we were horrified to see that the floor had collapsed right where we had been standing moments earlier. Had something not told me that it wasn't safe, I wouldn't have grabbed E's arm, and he probably would be at the bottom of the school right now, if not dead, then very hurt. As we stood there in shock at what had happened, we began to feel very grateful that the floor hadn't collapsed while we were all inside the classroom. We decided that those were enough of the classrooms, and we made our way into the gym. The floors felt much safer in there. We continued our investigation, and thinking back now we should have left after our friend almost died, but we were dumb and wanted to go on. I took the dowsing rods and began asking those generic questions. Is anyone there? Can you tell us your name, etc.? Eventually I asked the question, can you point to where you are? And to my surprise the rods pointed in the direction of the darker corner of the gym. Guys, come here, I shouted to my friends. I'm getting responses. As my friends came closer, the rods began to move as well. Now they weren't pointing in the corner anymore, they were following E. Now might be a good time to mention that this is the same guy who almost fell through the floor and the guy who made the sly comment in the basement about this thing's home. I'm not saying that he was being targeted by this thing, but it sure seemed like it at this point. No matter where he moved, the rods followed him. He went left, they followed. He went right, they followed. He ran around me, they followed a full circle. This creeped us out beyond belief, so we wanted to know why the rods were following him. As we asked our questions as to why the rods were following him, someone eventually asked, "Are you mad at him?" And then, in an instant, the rods went straight and unnaturally still. And the room fell quiet. So quiet in fact that it was as if we had all fallen deaf instantaneously. I got this insanely bad feeling as if something very evil had just entered the room. A few seconds later I felt something strong physically grab the ends of the rods in my hands. Whatever was grabbing them began thrashing them back and forth with enough force to move my whole body as if they were trying to break them from my grip. As this was happening, noises started coming from all around the school. It sounded like doors and lockers slamming, things being thrown down the halls and all around us, and screaming. Though the screaming may have been coming from us, it didn't help our situation by any means. We were all terrified. We had never experienced anything like this before. Then H, the same guy who saw the thing at the end of the hall, pointed in the direction of the dark corner of the gym and let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream. We didn't even bother to look and see what he was pointing and screaming at. The only thing in our mind at this point was get out. Now. We all quickly grabbed our things and sprinted out of the school, back to our cars. We got in and peeled out of there as fast as we could. We met back up at my place, still obviously shaken up by what had just happened. After taking a while to process this experience and decompress, we asked H what he had seen. He tells us that as everything was going on, he looked in the corner of the gym and saw something horrifying. He described seeing a massive thing, probably 7 feet tall, standing in the corner. It had unnaturally long arms that were spread out wide, its head had long devilish horns, and its mouth was open so wide that you could probably fit your head into it. He also mentioned that atop its unusually large mouth was a smile more evil than one could ever imagine. Knowing that something like that was so close to us was bone-chilling. In my opinion, we were lucky to make it out alive. We've never returned to that school and have no intention of ever going back. As far as we're concerned, if that old school was demolished and the rubble was burned, they'd be doing the world a favor. Maybe it would destroy or at the very least trap whatever that thing was in there for good. If you know the school, I highly suggest that you never go inside or even go onto the property. Save yourself the possible trauma. Believe what you want, but that night will forever be burned into our minds and haunt us in our nightmares.